Chapter 24. The Most Handsome Man. Li Feng subconsciously thought of the one in the Imperial Palace. It was said that His Highness would return to White Academy this year. If he took off his mask, what would his face look like? Would his face be destroyed by the fire, or would he still be as handsome as before? Perhaps only Grandmaster Jizun and Headmaster Tu Su knew about this matter, because other than the retired emperor, only these two people had seen His Highness's adult appearance. Well, maybe the High Priest could be added, but the High Priest seemed to still be in seclusion and wouldn't come here. Otherwise, with those two people's appearance and bearing, it would definitely cause a big disturbance in White Academy. In short, my good disciple, you can rest assured. Who dares to say they don't like the disciple of Grandmaster Jizun? The old man said with full confidence. His face was mighty and overbearing. Li Feng lightly coughed twice, that His Highness will. Not only does he dare to say it, he also dares to do it. He kicked you aside with one foot, did Grandmaster forget? You! Grandmaster Jizun turned around, thinking what was wrong with this brat Li Feng. Today he completely ruined this old man's stage. That His Highness is. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Grandmaster Jizun moved closer to her ear and said, the current royal family, he will also enter White Academy this year. That brat is too sinister, and his vengeful heart is strong. Disciple, when you meet a masked man in the future, you must stay away from him. Hellion Vivian indifferently responded. How could Grandmaster Jizun know that his disciple had already offended that person, and in the most reckless way? Hellion Vivian didn't dwell on this issue. After all, ever since she entered White Academy, she hadn't seen any masked man, but there was one thing she needed to ask. Master, the matter of you accepting me as your disciple, for the time being, don't tell anyone. Why? Grandmaster Jizun's eyes widened. He had finally accepted a disciple, and he wanted to show off in front of Tu Lao and the others. Hellion Vivian smiled. It's more interesting when the enemy is in the light and I am in the dark, and Master only needs to teach me, I can handle the rest myself. She wanted to find a backer, but that didn't mean she wanted to be a second generation that needed someone to protect her. Compared to relying on others, she preferred to fight alone. Disciple. The Grandmaster looked at his disciple and said in a low voice, actually, you don't have to be so sensible. It wasn't easy for him to accept a disciple. What's wrong with bringing her out to show off? Hellion Vivian was very firm on this point. You have to promise me and pretend that you don't know me in front of others. No. Jizun shook his head like an old urchin. This old man won't agree. This old man still wants to help you teach that Murong brat a lesson. Hellion Vivian also knew that the old man was doing this for her own good, so she chuckled and coaxed him. Teacher, there are so many people in the White Academy, and you're also the great master here. When the time comes and people know that you've taken in a trash, they'll laugh at you. Who dares? The Grandmaster turned around and roared, Li Feng, you tell this old man, who dares to mock this old man's disciple. Li Feng wiped his cold sweat and didn't dare to make a sound. He knew that this time, the Grandmaster was really angry. Hellion Vivian touched the bridge of her nose. Then we'll talk about it after a month. A month? Jizun's eyes suddenly lit up. Disciple, you're talking about the first test after entering the academy. That's right. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and couldn't hide her radiance. I want to let everyone know that I, Hellion Vivian, am not a love-struck fool, nor am I a trash. Jizun stared blankly at her for a moment, then suddenly laughed out loud. Ha, good disciple. Let them take a good look. Not only did his disciple know how to make armaments, she also knew how to beat people. Li Feng, however, didn't think as well as Grandmaster thought. He still hadn't forgotten the result of Hellion Vivian's previous test. Her martial chi was basically 0. Even if she was a genius in armaments, it still couldn't change the fact that her aptitude was quite low. Adding on the fact that there were so many elites in the White Academy, he was really worried about Helene Vivian's performance after a month. At night, the crescent moon hung high in the sky and the shadows of the trees swayed. In the East District of the Academy, there was a courtyard that was known as the concentration camp for geniuses. The people who lived there were all young ladies from famous families and young masters from influential families. Therefore, in this place, as long as one person intruded, it would attract the attention of all the new students. What's more, 2 people came at once. "Ah, Ju, it's here." Nangong Lai smiled evilly, the tip of his foot unruly pressed against the wooden door in front of him. "I've already helped you inquire, that little kitten lives in this room." Helene Jia Ju curved his thin lips, his teeth bit the glove on his left hand. Under the illumination of the moonlight, his handsome and flawless face was tainted with a bewitching coldness that bewitched people's hearts. "Very good." Then, only a bang sound was heard. He inserted both hands into his silver fur windbreaker, his long legs ferociously kicked open the wooden door that was blocking in front of him. Nangong Lai hurriedly jumped to the side, craned his neck and shouted. "Ah, Ju, damn it. Next time when you're kicking the door, can't you tell me in advance? You're too irritable." Beligaju didn't pay attention to him and walked unhurriedly into that antique room. In the room, all the young ladies and young masters from famous families stopped what they were doing and couldn't help but look towards him. His gaze didn't linger in the slightest as he elegantly stepped into the room. "Isn't that the young master who just entered the academy today? Heavens, why is he here? Did he come to look for Zhao Er? Zhao Er is indeed amazing, she even knows this kind of person." The young ladies gathered together, their cheeks slightly red as they looked at Beligaju's back. Those pairs of eyes seemed to be able to emit light. This kind of stalwart man, even if he didn't say a word, just by raising his eyebrows, he could make people's hearts beat faster. His one sentence, one word, even just a simple gesture, all carried an indescribable elegance, strategizing, deciding victory from 1,000 miles away. "Young master." Helene Zhao Er raised her head in astonishment. Her heart was wild with joy, but she didn't show it. After all, there were still many young ladies from aristocratic families here. She had to be a bit more reserved. She only looked at the man's ice-cold face. Her face was completely red as she spoke softly. "Is there something you need from me?" Beligaju didn't speak, but after seeing the woman's appearance, he fiercely wrinkled his thick eyebrows. Then, he turned around and left. "Hey! Ah, Ju, why did you come out so quickly?" Nangong Lai, who was still greeting the young ladies outside the room, saw his good friend and laughed. "It can't be, that little cat's endurance is so bad." Beligaju coldly raised his eyes, his chin slightly raised, the arc perfect, and his tone was like ice. "It's not her." "What?" Nangong Lai changed his evil smile and walked in with large strides. Looking at Helene Zhao's delicate face, his pair of long and narrow eyes were full of astonishment. Chapter 25. Although Nangong Lai had realized that something was wrong, he still put on his charming smile. "Excuse me, where is Miss Helene?" "I am her." The Helene Zhao lowered her head, half covered by her thick eyelashes. Although she was beautiful, she was not the person they were looking for. Nangong Lai was speechless. It turned out that when the people in the academy heard that they were looking for Miss Helene, they thought that they were talking about the talented and beautiful Helene Zhao. After all, her talent was there for all to see. In just a short day, she became the focus of attention. Basically, everyone in the academy, whether it was the new students or the masters in the academy, talked about this young lady the most. That was why such a misunderstanding occurred. Nangong Lai gritted his teeth in his heart, but his expression did not change. He only smiled slightly, and like an elegant gentleman, he left the room. The Hellion Giaour did not understand. She blinked her eyes. She really did not understand why these two people came in one after the other, said that they were looking for her, and then left without saying anything. But no matter what, she enjoyed this kind of treatment. Especially when they walked near her, she especially liked the envious gazes of those people. "Sister, did they all take a fancy to you?" When Hellion Mace said this, she was envious and jealous. The Hellion Giaour also thought of this, but she understood that there were many people around, so she could not show too much. She only bit her thin lips, "Don't talk nonsense." There was not a bit of unwillingness in her tone, it was all smiles. Hellion Mace sourly continued, "They must have taken a fancy to you. Otherwise, they wouldn't have run over to look for you. After seeing you, they felt that it was too abrupt, so they left without saying a single word. I won't talk to you anymore, you will only make fun of me." The Hellion Giaour shyly stomped her feet and sat back on the bed. Her eyes were filled with joy, as if she was falling in love for the first time. At the same time, Nangong Lai was chasing after them, shouting, "It's a misunderstanding, Ah Ju. It's all a misunderstanding. There's nothing wrong with what I do. It's all because those people think too highly of themselves that they thought I was looking for Hellion Giaour. She won't live in this courtyard." Baligaju looked around and slowly interrupted Nangong Lai's words. Nangong Lai sighed, as if he didn't understand. "Why? You're forgetting that she's a piece of trash." Bailey Jia Ju smiled, the tip of his tongue licked the broken corner of his mouth, a bewitchingly cold demonic charm emerged little by little from his pupils. "She should be the same as us, living in the worst courtyard." Nangong Lai swallowed a mouthful of saliva from his laughter. When he finally reacted, he realized that he was already far away. Thus, he kindly mourned for someone once more. Ah Ju's words meant that he was going to do it himself. Originally, if he had been the one to look for the kitten, perhaps the kitten's death would not have been too ugly. But if Ah Ju did it himself, Nangong Lai shook off the goosebumps on his body, the corners of his mouth curled up. The real show was about to begin. "Ah Ju, how about we go kick their doors one by one right now?" "Nothing. If you want to kick them, do it yourself. I'm going to bathe." "Bathe again? It hasn't even been a day and you've already bathed 5 times. Don't you think it's too much?" Nangong Lai snorted twice. Baligaju let the people behind him shout as he reached out and unbuttoned his outer robe. A trace of a sinister smile appeared in his dark eyes. He already knew where she was, what was the hurry? This time, he wanted to see how the kitten with broken legs would escape. Achoo. Hellion Vivian, who was holding a wooden basin, sneezed heavily as the night breeze blew. She reached out and rubbed the small tip of a pen. Everything was good at White Academy, but there was a common problem that schools all over the world had. It was not very convenient to bathe. No matter how comfortable the accommodation was, there would not be a bathroom in the dormitory. Of course, ancient bathrooms were not as particular as modern bathrooms. They only used a large wooden bucket, filled the bucket with water and flower petals, and soaked themselves in it for a while to be smoked. Then it could be considered a bath. In this regard, White Academy was better. They used the hot spring water from the mountain and specially built several bamboo huts for the students to use as bathrooms. They even separated the male and female students. Hellion Vivian also did not have any misgivings. She took her pure white towel and the ancient incense leaves, and handsomely pulled open the left side of the bamboo hut. All 4 sides were connected. She was unprepared to meet a pair of long, narrow, and ice-cold black eyes. The man in front of her had a figure that made all young girls go crazy. Long legs, narrow waist, wide shoulders, and straight buttocks. The graceful mermaid line was as if it was meticulously carved by the creator. There was almost no flaw to be found. He should have just finished bathing. The strands of hair in front of his forehead were wet. He used one hand to casually press it to the back of his head, only revealing the pinky ring on his little finger. The fine diamonds on the ring were shining with an evil light that matched him extremely well. And the innate arrogance on his body was like a king patrolling his territory, emitting a strong oppressive feeling that could not be ignored. But this was not the main point. The main point was Big Brother, even if you are bathing, you still need to wrap yourself in a blanket. Helene Vivian was forced to admire the picture of a beautiful man in front of her eyes. Before her face could turn red, her back suddenly tensed up. Wait a minute, this man looked very familiar. It was actually him. The unlucky guy who was kissed by her. Like a dangerous animal, Helene Vivian's first reaction after seeing the man's appearance was to immediately turn around. But unfortunately, it was already too late. The collar behind her back was carelessly pulled. Although the force was not very strong, it was enough to nail her to the ground. Moreover, her nose was filled with the domineering cold fragrance of the man who had just finished bathing, as if it wanted to swallow her whole body, surging violently. Helene Vivian had just raised her eyes when she fell into a pair of deep eyes like an ancient well. Those eyes were not unfamiliar to her. They were devilishly cold and mysterious, cold and emotionless. They were like the red spider lilies that bloomed in hell and were sent back by the demons, but still lingered on the road to the yellow springs. If one was not careful, they could drown in the beauty of the netherworld. When the man saw her, he slightly narrowed his eyes. After a moment, the man's tightly pursed lips slowly curved into an incomparably evil smile. That kind of dangerous smile only made Helene Vivian think of a sentence: there is a path to heaven but you don't take it, there is no door to hell but you barge in. This was really a frightening coincidence. Helene Wei licked her slightly dry lips. Her pair of eyes moved nimbly as she started to plan how she was going to escape. Don't waste your time. Beligaju looked down at the woman in front of him. His cold and languid voice carried a sense of danger as it came close to Helene Vivian's ears. Do you think that after I finally caught you, I will let you escape so easily, N? Chapter 26. The man's was very problematic. The ending sound was like a hook that hooked people's hearts. It was so low that it could almost make people lose all their defenses. However, Helene Vivian just raised her eyebrows and smiled. Her shrewdness was not reduced at all. What are you talking about? What do you mean by wasting my thoughts? What do you mean by easily escaping? I don't understand at all. Oh. Beligaju pinched her chin and smiled angrily. Don't tell me that you lost your memory after only one afternoon. Helene Vivian rubbed her temples with a smile. I was hit by something today. Do you need me to remind you that it was me you hit? Beligaju raised her chin and his handsome face was very close. It was as if every breath could hit her lips. Perhaps I should kill you now so that you can remember the good things you have done before you die. His voice was very cold and his words were very slow. It was so slow that Helene Vivian felt that he was like a death god standing on the edge of hell with a death record book in his hand. Helene Vivian knew that he would not let her go easily. In front of such a smart man, she could never use the method that she had used once again. What's more, there was not much poison. Yuan Ming only allowed her to use it 3 times. She had to pay a price to get the extra one. Yuan Ming was a real devil. She did not want to talk about the price with a devil. Perhaps, there was another way. Helene Vivian turned her face and heard the sound of water outside. Her eyes flashed and she suddenly shouted, "Someone come, molestation." Do you think anyone will believe you if you shout like that? Bailey Jia Ju dangerously narrowed his eyes. At this moment, the cruel smile at the corner of his mouth looked exceptionally bloodthirsty. His slender fingers pressed on her lips and used his strength to ravage them. It seems that I've still been too kind to you. Helene Vivian raised her phoenix eyes and refused to give in. She seized the opportunity and directly bit him. But the result, not only did she not achieve the revenge effect she wanted. That man's face was calm as he let her bite him. His slender fingers even maliciously scratched the tip of her tongue. Helene Vivian's back stiffened and she almost cursed. Why did you stop, N? Beligaju pulled her back and looked indifferent. Not bad. Helene Vivian raised the corner of her mouth. If you have time to praise me, why don't you put on your clothes? Because I never thought that you would just simply let people think that you molested me. If you don't believe me, listen. 1, 2, 3, here it comes. Just as she finished speaking, there was a knock on the door. Helene Vivian took advantage of the chaos and slipped out of her outer garment. No one could see how she did it. Her speed was very fast, so fast that it was a little dazzling. In the blink of an eye, she was 10 feet away from the man. This kind of thing might be difficult for others to do, but Helene Vivian was not just anyone. She was an ace mercenary. Taking off clothes like this was one of the necessary skills. No one would have thought that she had taken the opportunity to unbutton her collar at the beginning. She talked so much with the man, just for this last escape. Beligaju did not move. He looked at the empty outer garment in his hand and did not seem to be disappointed at all. He only raised his eyebrows playfully. He did not know that there was such a way to take off clothes in this world. Hey, is there anyone inside? Are you stupid? Just listen to the sound, there is someone inside. Someone is already shouting molestation. Hurry up and kick the door open. The noise outside was getting louder and louder. Helene Vivian laughed in a low voice, Mei Nan, you have to think carefully. If you waste time to catch me, you won't have time to put on clothes. If you would rather be naked like this and let others admire you, then come on. Beligaju's entire side face was hidden in the shadow. His hand holding the woman's outer garment slowly tightened. It turned out that this was the woman's idea. It seems that you don't want others to admire your naked body. Very well, we have the same goal. Helene Vivian's hand moved the locked wooden window and did not forget to reply, I have something to do, so I will leave first. This time, we will not meet again. Boy, Beligaju looked at her wickedly. His voice was as gloomy as a snake that had just come out of the water, you are really not afraid that I will kill you. By the way, let me seriously say that your figure is really good. Helene Vivian looked back and whistled provocatively. Then, she jumped out of the wooden window. What she did not know was that there was a pair of dark eyes behind her, which had been locked on her slender figure. Until she disappeared into the vast night, the man's thin and cold lips showed a devilish smile, but that smile did not reach the bottom of his eyes. His eyes were as dark as midnight, filled with a terrifying coldness. The people outside the bamboo house were still hitting the wooden door. Beligaju glanced at the woman's outer garment in his hand. A dark light flashed in his eyes, bang. The people outside the house finally broke in. When they saw the scene inside the house, their expressions were indescribable. The classmate in front of them had nothing on him except for the outer garment around his waist. They could even see his abs that made people jealous. Gulp gulp. The people who came in swallowed their saliva several times. But, that outer garment should be worn by a girl. There were even flowers embroidered on it. He did not need to guess to be able to imagine what had just happened here. For example, a pervert who saw Beligaju sneaked into the bathroom and did something to him. For example, Beligaju refused to comply, so he shouted, someone come, I am being molested, and so on. In short, the freshmen with strong imaginations began to make endless guesses. After Nan Gong Lai heard this news, he was stunned for a full half a minute. Then, he laughed out loud. You were molested. Beligaju raised his head and slowly looked at him. He reached out and tore off the outer garment around his waist. Hey, you have to be more reserved. Nan Gong Lai immediately stood a little further away. I don't have that kind of hobby. But, did you really shout molested? Beligaju arrogantly pulled down his thin lips. His gaze was extremely cold. What do you think? Nan Gong Lai touched the bridge of his nose. Of course, he did not believe that this man would shout something like molested. But, his long and narrow eyes turned. His gossipy mood was quite strong. What's up with that outer garment that a girl is wearing? Beligaju's gaze paused. He casually raised his hand and buttoned the finely crafted buttons one by one. Seeing that he did not speak, Nan Gong Lai immediately thought of something. His eyes widened in surprise. It can't be that little cat again, right? Chapter 27. Having heard what was said, Beligaju's indifferent face suddenly curved up into an arc. However, his eyes were ice-cold without the slightest bit of warmth. It really is her. Nan Gong Lai beamed as he rubbed his chin. He turned his head to look at Beligaju's lying figure and meaningfully said, this time, you definitely won't let her off. However, your current situation in the academy isn't very good. Those young masters living in the superior compound seem to find you very unpleasant. Let them be. Facing this kind of provocative news, Beligaju only coldly gave Nan Gong Lai 4 words. His fingers slightly curled as if he thought of something. His eyes suddenly became incomparably deep. That little thing was actually even more different than what he had imagined. That kind of tender, that kind of softness, unexpectedly gave him an impulse that he had never had before. Nan Gong Lai knew that he had never put those young masters in his eyes. From the moment he met this man, he knew that he was even more arrogant and haughty than his appearance. As long as he was willing, the entire imperial court could allow him to do whatever he wanted, not to mention a few young masters from influential families who had just entered the academy. He hoped that those new students would open their eyes wide and take a good look at what kind of man this was. By all means, they wouldn't foolishly bump into the muzzle of a gun. Of course, if some people didn't have eyes and bumped into him, he would also be very happy to see them. Nan Gong Lai lay down on the bed, put his hands behind his head, and smiled wanton. For example, a certain little kitten that wasn't afraid of death, hee. I'm really looking forward to the beautiful academy life. The next day, the first rays of the morning sun brushed past the faces and the green willows formed a shade. The young ladies who had to wake up early to start their first class instructed their servant girls to draw water and wash their faces. Hey, did you guys hear? What? It said that last night, there was a flower-picking girl who entered the boys' bathing pool and almost raped a young master. When Hellion Vivian heard this sentence, she raised her head to rinse her mouth. She didn't hold the water properly and almost spat it out. Cough, cough, cough. When did she almost rape him? It was obviously him who made a move on her, okay? I don't know which woman is so bold, it's too scary. Hellion Vivian, if there's anything to be afraid of, it should be the boys who are worried. Why are you guys joining in the fun? I already said that you're a female rapist. And I heard that the woman is big and burly. She has the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. Hellion Vivian. She's not that bad, right? What happened next? What happened next? Later on, that young master shouted that he was being molested and scared her away. That was really dangerous. Pooh. Hellion Vivian couldn't hold it in any longer. Imagining that man hugging his chest and screaming about being molested, she laughed so hard that her shoulders started to tremble. Yep, It was indeed a close call. The servant girls and masters looked at each other in dismay. They really didn't understand what this person was laughing about. They only thought that she had been provoked. After all, they were all young misses from the defense division. Her younger sister went to the envied, superior compound, while she herself stayed in the worst, inferior compound. They didn't care. After all, their birth was there for all to see. They had also just been chosen by White Academy and had long prepared in their hearts that they would live in the inferior compound. At White Academy, what they didn't lack the least were the sons of officials and the daughters of wealthy families. Just randomly pick one out and they would be the son of the Nine Gates commander or the daughter of the capital's grand tutor. People like them who came from remote small cities were nothing more than a group of commoners, in these people's eyes. Actually, this Miss Hellion was obviously one of the bloodlines of the four great clans, yet she was reduced to the same realm as them. It seemed that the rumors weren't false. She really was a waste without the slightest bit of martial chi. Bang! The ancient tree heavily knocked open the large iron bell hanging in the middle of the courtyard. This kind of heavy sound reminded all the students that a new class was about to begin. In every courtyard of White Academy, a large ancestral hall was built. The floor of the ancestral hall was made of pure ancient wood. Inside, incense was lit, and the smell of ancient music was everywhere. When Hellion Vivian arrived at the ancestral hall, the inside of the hall was already filled with people. Looking over, it was a chaotic mess, just like the opening of a high school in the 21st century. Different from other people, she chose the furthest back seat. That position was extremely good. There was light coming in and shining on the body. It was very suitable for sleeping, and also very suitable for secretly entering the paradise space to cultivate. She supported her chin with one hand and casually propped her elbow on the desk. Sitting on the floor was a fluffy cushion, enjoying a person's freedom. Only, this freedom didn't last for too long. Because just as she sat down, a laugh came from the side of her ear. That laugh was indescribably arrogant, as if coming to speak was giving her a big favor. I thought I saw wrong just now. I didn't expect that it really was that love-struck waste who wouldn't let go of cousin. Look at her appearance, is she so poor that she can't even afford to buy an outer garment? Ha ha ha. The person's words quickly attracted the attention of all around. Hellion Vivian closed her eyes and reached out to pick her ears. She was extremely undisciplined, as if whatever the other person said had nothing to do with her. It was her indifferent attitude that made the other person angrier. He was the dignified son of the Shandong provincial governor. Everywhere he went, he was the object of worship. This waste actually looked down on him like this, not even sparing him a glance. Zhang Shiji immediately restrained his smile. His face was gloomy, and with a backhand slap, he left a shallow handprint on the short table that Hellion Vivian was lying on. The handprint's shape was very special, and a layer of green mist floated around it. The new students heavily sucked in a breath and whispered, "It's someone from the Clear Void sect. Look at that handprint, it should be their sect's unique divine skill, the dragon subduing claw. It's really powerful. If this palm landed on a person's body, they would definitely be injured or killed." When she heard the three words dragon subduing claw, Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed. She sized up the youth in front of her. If he didn't mention this move, she was afraid that she wouldn't have remembered this scum. From generation to generation in the Zhang family, which generation didn't receive her grandfather's kindness? But before her mother entered the womb, this Zhang Shiji and his father switched sides to Madame Su's side at the last moment. He even turned around and bit her mother, saying that she didn't have any tolerance, oppressing a concubine everywhere. He was so angry that he died early. Who would have thought that an 8-year-old child's lies were even more poisonous than poison? When the entire capital was laughing at her mother, he actually received a reward from Madame Su. Even when she accidentally bumped into him, he kicked her and even fiercely used the dragon-subduing claw on her back. And this time, the matter between Murong Changfeng and Helian Jiao was also something that he pulled the strings. He really was a professional procuress for 20 years. Helian Vivian recalled the past, and the corner of her mouth suddenly raised into a dangerous arc. Chapter 28. Seeing that she didn't react for a long time, Zhang Shijie laughed out loud again. "Look at how scared this trash is by me, what a pitiful little thing." As Zhang Shijie spoke, he wanted to grab Helian Vivian's hair and pull it down. But before his hand could touch Helian Vivian's hair, the girl in front of him was bounced back. Her body was bent to an unimaginable degree, and when her bones intersected, only a cracking sound could be heard. The right hand that Zhang Shijie was most proud of was broken. No one saw her movements clearly. When they reacted, Helian Weiwei had already grabbed Zhang Shijie's wrist with a smile on her lips, like an empress walking out from the smoke of gunpowder. Everyone was stunned. The air seemed to have solidified, and the surroundings gradually became silent. Only Zhang Shijie gasped and looked at Helian Vivian in disbelief. He was in so much pain that his face was covered in cold sweat. He raised his left hand and wanted to fight back. Crack. Another cracking sound. Helian Vivian looked at him with a smile. "Such a restless dog paw, it's better to remove it." "Ah!" Zhang Shijie screamed in pain. The kind of pain that drilled into his flesh and bones made his face pale to the extreme in an instant. He lay on the ground and roared without caring about his image. "What the fuck are you still standing there for? Go for this, young master." At this time, the young masters behind Zhang Shijie finally reacted and immediately sent their legs over. There were about 4 or 5 of them, and each of them had martial qi. Their attacks were ruthless, and their long legs could cut the wind. Ordinary people couldn't deal with them at all. And Helian Vivian wasn't an ordinary person. She was known as the ace agent who was the best at fighting. Regardless of whether it was the underworld or the legal world, no one dared to go against her directly. Looking at the incoming leg wind, Helian Vivian smiled. Her dragon-like body shuttled through the crowd, and she grabbed one of the people's arms and used her strength. Crack. At the same time the sound of bones breaking rang out, Helian Weiwei put one foot on the short table and abruptly flipped over. Her long hair fluttered as she lifted her white leg and in an instant, chopped down on the long leg that was facing the wind. If it was a competition of ruthlessness, who could be more ruthless than the mercenary queen? "Are you still fighting?" She sneered and stood with her back against the light. She had one hand around the neck of a person and one foot on Zhang Shijie's back. Her entire body was emitting an aura that could almost burn people's eyes. The several young masters who were lying on the ground in disarray, one after another, retreated backwards. Their faces were filled with fear as they looked at Weiwei, fearing that she would make another move. In the end, they crawled up like dogs eating feces and fled out of the ancestral hall in panic. While covering their heads as they fled, they left behind some laughable malicious words. "Just you wait." The new students in the ancestral hall looked at them and roared with laughter. However, Helian Vivian acted as if nothing had happened. She picked up the ancient scroll on the ground and blew on it. Then, she placed it on the short table and continued to rest with her eyes closed. There was still some time before the Grand Master's arrival. In such a short period of time, the inferior compound had already stirred up trouble. Zhang Shijie gripped his arm and cursed, "Damn trash. Brother Jia, why don't we stop bothering her?" One of the young masters suggested, "White Academy is not like the outside world. If you cause trouble, you will be expelled." Zhang Shijie was angry. "You mean to say that you want me to bear with it? But you obviously can't beat her." A few of the young masters whispered. They were beginning to regret agreeing to help. Zhang Shijia also realized that his tone was wrong. He lowered his voice and said, "What are you afraid of? We have the defense division behind us." "But isn't that Hellion Vivian also a member of the defense division?" Some people were puzzled and frowned. Zhang Shijia looked left and right. His voice was gloomy. Hee, what kind of member of the defense division is she? She didn't even inquire about who is in charge of the defense division. A trash who dares to come to White Academy is simply courting death. Brother Jia means that there is someone who wants her to. Zhang Shijia cried out in pain, "Don't guess anymore. Hurry up and fix my hand. Once this matter is done, there will be benefits for you." Hey! Those young masters' eyes lit up when they heard the 3 words defense division. Now that they heard that there would be benefits, they hurriedly helped Zhang Shijia heal his hand. This Hellion Vivian is really strange. She didn't even use a bit of martial qi. How can she be so powerful? Even Brother Jia is not her opponent. Hearing this, Zhang Shijia's face sank. Today my condition is not good. I will get back at her sooner or later. As if he couldn't stand it, he kicked the stone under his foot out. While Zhang Shijia was still cursing, the group of young masters on the other side seemed to have seen something extremely frightening. Everyone's face became very ugly. Their mouths were wide open and they stuttered, "Jia, Brother Jia." "What?" Zhang Shijia angrily raised his eyes and saw a shadow not far away. That person's shadow seemed to have just woken up. His black hair was still curled up and there was a leaf on his pure white robe. The man standing next to him was casually tossing the stone in his hand. The corner of his mouth had an impudent evil smile. Although Zhang Shijia was born in Shandong, he spent more time in the capital than in his hometown. He mingled in the capital's circle since he was young. Usually, he was like a shadow following behind Murong Xiaofeng. With Madame Su's support, he knew many young masters in high positions in the capital. But these 2 people, he obviously hadn't seen them before, so he didn't care. At once, he fiercely glared back, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen others get angry before?" Hearing this, the shadow slowly raised his head and glanced at Zhang Shijia. Just one glance was enough to make Zhang Shijia lose his ability to move. What kind of gaze was that? It was cold to the point of being emotionless. It was like a soul-snatching envoy from the underworld, making people's hearts tremble. No one saw clearly how he moved. They only saw a white light flash in front of their eyes. When they reacted, the shadow was already in front of Zhang Shijia. The fine hair on his forehead lightly fluttered. His posture was wild and ostentatious. The outline of his face was deep. His eyes were like a young leopard, cold and cruel, but concealed a burning passion. Zhang Shijia subconsciously reached out to block, but found that the opponent's internal energy was far above his. He was forcibly bounced back and fell to the ground. Creak. Only a crisp sound was heard. The shadow's foot casually stepped on Zhang Shijia's calf. Like that, he casually walked past, as if the person on the ground wasn't worth his attention. That kind of back view was like that of an ancient god. It was like the only pure snow between heaven and earth, but it was also blazing and clamorous, covering the sky and covering the sun. Chapter 29. Silence, dead silence. Everyone present looked at this scene in disbelief. The expression on their faces was extremely interesting. After a while, people seemed to find their breath. Their eyes were full of unspeakable shock. Damn it, my leg. Zhang Shiji was in so much pain that even tears came out. He painfully rolled left and right, one hand stretched out to ask someone to help him up. But people didn't dare to move at all, because another evil charming man was putting his hand on their shoulder. He smiled casually. Come, tell me quickly, where is the kitten that beat you into a cripple now? The young masters were crying. When were they beaten into a cripple? Well, it's almost there. After a while of painful complaints, Nangong Lai's fox-like eyes narrowed, so it's hiding in the ancestral hall. After saying this, he shouted at the figure on the lawn in the distance, "Hey, Ju, do you want to go to class to take a look?" Not going. The figure closed his eyes, the morning light hit his thin lips, like a layer of ice, making his perfect facial features look more dazzling than the sun. Nangong Lai continued to shout, "You have to think carefully, maybe the kitten is there." The figure raised his hand, took away the ancient Sanskrit book in front of his eyes, his shining fingertips played with the gorgeous ring on his little finger, his evil thin lips slowly, very slowly curved into a smile that made people tremble with fear. At this time, sitting in the ancestral hall, Hellion Vivian was lying on the low table, hiding from the master who just came in. She stuffed a few strawberries into her mouth, in order to ensure that she could completely absorb the nutrition of the strawberries. She fell asleep in a daze. Anyway, according to experience, under normal circumstances, the first day of school wouldn't have any content. It was usually self-introduction. It was okay to not listen. Hellion Wei Wei's guess was not wrong. That teacher who wore an ancient robe and held a ferule in his hand indeed came up and introduced himself. However, before he could even finish half of his introduction, he wrinkled his white eyebrows and said, "Everyone be quiet. 2 new students have temporarily joined our academy." As he spoke, he looked toward the entrance, his eyes were filled with the displeasure of an elder. "You all can come in." The moment the tall and slender figure stepped into the ancestral hall, it was as if all the air had been taken away. He was so lazy that he was peerless in his generation. He wore a green robe and a white robe, and his black hair was like silk. He really deviated from the classics and was extremely luxurious. At this time, people only thought of one sentence: handsome as jade, unparalleled in the world. It's the 2 young masters. They're so handsome, they look even better up close. The girl's eyes shining brightly, the 2 figures who stepped into the ancestral hall, the enthusiasm that made the master's face blue. Silence, silence. The white-bearded, silver-haired master with one hand behind his back, the other knocked the ruler in his hand, and warned with a glare. Nangong Lai, on the other hand, was very disapproving. His beautiful eyes scanned the entire ancestral hall. When he saw a few noble ladies, his eyes blinked. The young ladies lowered their heads in embarrassment. Their ears were red, and their palms were sweating nervously. They wanted to look but were afraid to raise their heads. Beligaju, on the other hand, was expressionlessly turning his thumb ring, his burning eyes finally fixed on a corner of the ancestral hall. His eyes, which lacked interest, seemed to be colorless. The lines in his eyes were like a piece of extremely beautiful but sharp and cold black gem. It made people tremble with fear. This kind of Beligaju looked very much like the demon prince described in the ancient comics, elegant, cold, handsome, and superior. Of course, Hellion Wei Wei heard the commotion, but she was in thick pajamas, so naturally, she was unwilling to open her eyes. Anyway, it did not matter to her who came, but she did not know why, but her back was always a little cold. What? It was probably the problem of the posture. She should change her posture and sleep again. Hellion Vivian put the book upright, and sure enough, she felt much better, continuing to lie down comfortably. Okay, you 2 go to the back first, we'll change your positions another day. The master maintained the atmosphere in the ancestral hall with great difficulty, frowning as he opened his mouth again. To be honest, he didn't really want to lead the new students of this courtyard. The students with the worst aptitudes in the entire White Academy were all here. If the dean didn't say that he would be the head director and he would be the assistant director, he wouldn't take over this courtyard even if he was beaten to death. Speaking of which, he still didn't understand why the dean was willing to be the head director of the inferior courtyard. Could it be because this place was too bad, no one was willing to take over, and only the dean could come personally? The master was right. The reason why Tu Su Feng was willing to be the head director was indeed because this place was too bad, no one was willing to take over. But there was another reason, no one would be able to guess, no matter who came. That was because these two had just stepped into the inferior courtyard, no matter if it was status or strength, they were all extraordinary youths. There's no need to change positions, sitting at the back is just right. Beligaju slowly said, his low voice carrying an unfathomable mystery. The master didn't know about the grudges between him and Hellion Vivian, and even more didn't know that this kind of arrangement was exactly what the man wanted. He only thought that he was sensible, and nodded his head in satisfaction. Hellion Vivian finally realized that something was wrong. Just as she wrinkled her eyebrows, she heard a dissolute and evil voice coming from behind. "Ah, Ju, this little kitten is strange. There's obviously no fluctuation of martial chi on her body, but she can put down a few third-stage martial artists in the blink of an eye. No wonder you've suffered losses time and time again from her. Shut up." Two light words, without a trace of fluctuation. But that deep and cold voice was like a basin of ice water, abruptly making Hellion Vivian feel cold from the bottom of her ears to her toes, and from her toes back again. In the end, even her scalp was numb, and her back was creepy. Her inhuman intuition told her not to turn around no matter what, but human instinct was unavoidable. By the time she reacted, her line of sight had already turned towards the source of the voice. In front of her, the dissolute and unruly man was standing there sloppily, the corner of his mouth had a teasing arc, and he was looking at her with a smile as if he was looking at a small animal. Behind her was the man who was rumored to have been raped by her. Today, he was wearing clothes. A pure white fur cloak covered his slender figure, making his facial features look even more handsome. He was like a god from ancient times, cold and ascetic, with a suffocating sense of oppression. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up. With just a glance, one could see that this man was somewhat evil. However, that evil smile of his made the hearts of the girls beat faster. It was like a little deer bumping into each other, but also like a moth attracted to a flame, pure and wanton. Of course, Hellion Vivian didn't think that it was a coincidence to be surrounded by these two men, without leaving any gaps. They were obviously here to block her. The bad situation made her feel an inexplicable chill in the bottom of her heart. Chapter 30. Running away was unwise. Hellion Vivian leaned back and looked at Beligaju lazily. She was as calm as ever. Bailey Jia Ju raised his eyebrows and tugged at the fur coat on his body. When he lowered his head, people could see his fair and strong skin. It was so perfect and flawless that it was eye-catching. Only then did Hellion Wei Wei recognize that the outerwear he was wearing was the one she took off last night. He was indeed a pervert. How much did he hate her? He didn't even let go of her coat. And, didn't they say that the ancients were more reserved? This person took off his clothes in front of everyone. Why didn't the teacher say anything? The teacher was speechless. The teacher was stunned by His Highness' bold and unrestrained action. Because even though Beligaju was taking off his clothes, there was no trace of embarrassment on his face. His movements were still so elegant. When the people below saw this, they whispered excitedly. Slap! Beligaju casually threw the coat in his hand next to Hellion Vivian's short table. Then, he slowly lowered his body and put his hands on the table. His deep eyes looked straight at Hellion Vivian and smiled sinisterly. Don't tell me you lost your memory again. Would you believe me if I said I lost my memory? Hellion Vivian looked at the coat at the bottom of her feet and smiled. I didn't expect you to like my clothes so much. Nangong Lai laughed at the side. Ah, Ju, listen to what she said. She said you like her. Hellion Vivian was speechless. Where did this fox-like man come from? Could he not laugh so exaggeratedly in her ear? Also, was he the emperor of imagination? She was clearly talking about the clothes, not her. You can shut up now. Beligaju said to Nangong Lai indifferently. When he turned his head again, he directly reached out and pinched Hellion Vivian's chin, dangerously close to her face. Tell me, how should I kill you? Hellion Vivian suggested, why don't we have a good talk? Peace is the most important thing. I personally don't like fighting and killing. Everyone was speechless. Who was the one who had just crippled a bunch of young masters? Who was it? Oh. Bailey Jia Ju raised his eyebrows and put on an expression of interest to continue listening. Hellion Vivian's mind was clear. I accidentally kissed you. It's my fault. But haven't I already compensated you? As for last night, I really didn't know that there would be someone there. Compensation. Beligaju looked at her for a moment and slightly narrowed his eyes. His demonic cold eyes contained a bit of coldness. Hellion Vivian thought that it couldn't be. Did this man forget that she had given him 20 taels of hush money? Or did he think that it wasn't enough? He probably hadn't bought a silver robe yet, right? I can give you more money. Hellion Vivian's expression didn't change in the slightest. She was still as cold as ever. Even in this kind of situation, she still maintained a calm smile. Other than her slightly moist eyes, everything else seemed like a hedonistic playboy. Beligaju seemed to like this expression of hers. His slender hand propped up on the side as he lowered his head to admire her with an evil smile. His peach blossom eyes were slightly raised. How interesting. He, who commanded Ghost Palace and shook the entire capital, was actually being offered a price by a woman. Nangong Lai had long been dumbfounded. He stared blankly and didn't know how to react. This man had been obsessed with cleanliness since he was young. He never let anyone come within 3 feet of him. 3 years ago, General Hu's daughter took advantage of her father's high position in the imperial court and actually dared to put her hand on his body during a dance at a banquet. At that time, he wanted to cut off Miss Hu's hand. General Hu pleaded for leniency and apologized for a long time before this matter was dropped. From that day onwards, no one dared to challenge his authority. Today, not only did this little kitten forcefully kiss him, she even asked for a price. It's over, it's over. She's really done for this time. Nangong Lai nervously looked at the two people looking at each other and swallowed his saliva. Hellion Vivian sat in the same position for a long time. Then, she lazily leaned back and continued to say, I can also compensate you for what I saw yesterday. Nangong Lai heavily coughed twice. She actually dared to say that. Compensation again. Beligaju's eyelids twitched. His ink-black hair fluttered in the wind. The playfulness in his eyes became even stronger. Hellion Vivian nodded and looked at him calmly. I was too rash these 2 times. You can name the price. As long as it's not too excessive, I can agree. After Beligaju heard this, the smile on his face became even more beautiful. Sounds like a good deal. Very good, Hellion Vivian chuckled. She seemed to have met a wise man who could adapt to the circumstances. But Bailey Jia Ju suddenly lowered his body, a smile blossoming on his lips. My price is very high. Are you sure you can afford it? No, it can't be. Nangong Lai was petrified once again. He deeply felt that there was something wrong with his hearing. The dignified Dragon War Empire's royal family unexpectedly wanted to sell him. Heavens, this must be a mistake somewhere. Did Ju go out today without taking his medicine? Acting on his own initiative like this, Imperial Grandfather won't agree. Hellion Wei Wei curved her lower lip, her tone was clear and cold, yet polite. "I've said it very clearly just now, as long as it's not too excessive, I'll agree. However, this doesn't mean that you can randomly quote a price." After saying this, Helene Vivian seemed to have thought of something. She took out a banknote from her bosom and put it in his hand. "I'll give you this first. It's enough to buy a scholar's hat. I'll pay you the rest later." It turned out that Helene Vivian really thought that Beligaju and the others were new students like herself who needed to rely on themselves to earn money. Helene Vivian couldn't be blamed for having this kind of misconception. White Academy originally ordered that they must bring a few things that they needed. And those who didn't bring it were usually some concubines' daughters and sons who weren't favored in their families. Those people were usually assigned to the inferior compound. They had just reported to the teacher, so it wasn't a secret in White Academy. Moreover, Helene Vivian herself was also one of them. In addition, Nangong Lai and Beligaju, in order to hide their identities, deliberately used a relatively coarse cloth to cover their noble aura. Therefore, Helene Vivian naturally thought that Beligaju and the others were the same kind of people. Only then did she begin to reflect on whether or not she had done too much. She wanted to use money to compensate him. It was very obvious that Beligaju felt that this misunderstanding was very interesting. Because at this time, his beautiful thin lips were full of playfulness. It was like a demon's flower that bloomed on the banks of Wangshuan Lake, revealing traces of evil. Nangong Lai opened his eyes wide and pointed his finger at himself. "We look like good." Beligaju laughed deeply and interrupted Nangong Lai's following words. Nangong Lai suddenly turned his head and stared at him in disbelief. "What good?" One of them was a prince, the other a priest. Where did they look like poor students who couldn't afford a scholar's hat? Chapter 31. Beligaju met his gaze and slightly narrowed his eyes. His eyes were full of warning. Nangong Lai abruptly swallowed his words. Shaking off the goosebumps on his body, he looked at him without blinking. His Highness was addicted to playing the role of a poor student. He lazily raised his phoenix eyes and stroked Helene Vivian's lips with his finger. His seductive aura was wanton. "When the compensation is in place, I will naturally give you other services." Other services. After hearing these words, which made people think of flirtatious thoughts, the surrounding ladies felt as if they were standing on a stove and being handcuffed by fire. Their cheeks were boiling red. The teacher was so angry that he couldn't speak. He patted his chest. You. Helene Vivian expressed her innocence. She just wanted the other party to stop chasing her like an evil ghost. She had no intention of letting the other party pay with his body. What was with this feeling of a brothel? Separate. Quickly separate. The teacher held a ruler and crazily slammed the wooden table. "Where do you think this is?" "This is the ancestral hall, not a brothel." Openly defying the order of the ancestral hall. You, and you." The teacher pointed at Nangong Lai, Beligaju, and Helene Vivian with trembling fingers. He angrily roared, "Get out of here. Face the wall and reflect." At this moment, a gentle and clean low laugh came from outside the room. It was Tu Feng. "Dean!" The teacher immediately straightened his back. Beligaju's pupils sank and returned to his usual cold and frosty appearance. Wei Wei furrowed her eyebrows. Was it her misperception? Why did she feel that the dean's gaze on her was very meaningful? "It seems that you have already had a preliminary exchange before I came." Tu Feng surveyed the surroundings, and then fixed his gaze on the three people. Not only did he not pursue the matter, he instead curled his lips in satisfaction. "Seeing everyone so close to each other, I feel very gratified." Hearing this, the corners of everyone's mouths twitched. "Dean, which pair of eyes did you see them being lovey-dovey?" That's clearly mutual hatred. Tusufong was still smiling. His gaze seemed to sweep past Helly and Vivian. Interesting, that iceberg nephew of his could actually tolerate this little girl to live. According to a normal situation, blood should have been spilled here. After all, with that brat's temper, other than the retired emperor, he never cared about anyone else. Not simple. Perhaps he should properly investigate this little girl's identity. Perhaps something interesting would happen. As if he had seen an interesting program, the corners of Tusu Feng's mouth curled up slightly. Then, he put his left hand on his right hand and patted it. All right, now line up. What are you doing? Ever since Tu Sufeng came in, Nangong Lai became a little more serious, but his tone was still charming. Little Baldy, who was standing next to Tu Sufeng, glared at him fiercely. Then, with a kick, he sent him flying. Bye, cough you. After Nangong Lai jumped up, he seemed to have thought of something. The name that was at the tip of his tongue quickly turned into the word you. Little Baldy's face was expressionless. He ate the meat bun in his hand and warned in a dignified manner, those who question the dean, die. The more Helly and Vivian looked at him, the more she felt that this little Baldy was extremely cute. She really wanted to reach out and pinch him. Unfortunately, little Baldy's vigilance was too strong. It seemed that apart from the dean, he was extremely cold and overbearing to anyone who tried to get close to him. Why did she feel that he was a bit like that person? Helly and Vivian glanced at Beligaju's direction. The more she looked, the more she felt that the two people looked a bit alike. But after carefully calculating their ages, she felt that it was impossible. Even if this man's aura was strong, he was still only a 17 or 18-year-old youth. No matter how precocious he was, it was impossible for him to give birth to a 5 or 6-year-old baby. However, what Helly and Vivian cared about the most was Tu Sufeng's attitude. This seemingly gentle and harmless dean had a faint smile from beginning to end. It seemed that no matter what happened around him, he could remain calm and collected. A person who was able to do this was absolutely not as simple as a dean of an academy. Seeming to have noticed Wei Wei's gaze, Tu Sufeng beamed as he looked at her and continued to speak. It seems that everyone is very curious about my upcoming arrangements. This year's White Academy's regulations will be different from previous years. In a moment, you guys and the new students from the excellent, good, and good courtyards will work together to determine the courses that you'll be majoring in the future. This course, you guys can choose according to your own ideas. However, there is one point. Once you have chosen, you must compete in the new student exam 1 month from now. Those who do not pass, unfortunately, will lose the qualifications to be a student. This news was undoubtedly explosive to the new students of the inferior compound. Everyone was stunned and looked at each other blankly. And Tu Sufeng seemed to feel that this stimulation was not enough. He rubbed his chin and added, "Oh, I forgot to say. The passing rate is only 30%. I wish you all good luck." Only 30% passing rate. No matter if it was the new students of the inferior compound or the other 3 courtyards, they all became alarmed. Thus, the major course to choose was especially important. If you chose correctly, you may be able to pass. If you did not have eyes and chose martial qi as your major, you will definitely die an ugly death during the exam. This year, it seems that there are quite a few people who are very difficult to deal with. That Murong Changfeng, and that Helian Jiaoer, they are all too powerful. They are simply the best candidates for geniuses. It seems that choosing martial qi as your major will be very bad. That's only natural. People like us better not go and throw away our lives. Next, Helly and Vivian. The headmaster's deep and aged voice interrupted the whispers around him. Helly and Vivian lazily stretched her waist and placed her hand on the back of her neck. She moved her hands left and right in a handsome manner, then walked towards the master. The master flipped through the old yellow scroll in his hand. Seeing that it was a new student of the inferior compound, he did not raise his head and pointed to the side. Medicine refinement is over there. You can directly go over. Helene Vivian did not move at all. She lowered her eyes and looked at the master in front of her. Her tone was indifferent. I chose martial qi, not medicine refinement. What did you say? You want to choose martial qi? The master did not dare to believe what he had heard. He unconsciously raised his voice by a few decibels. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on Helene Vivian. They all roared with laughter. Is this trash an idiot? A person who scored 0 in the exam actually dares to major in martial qi. What is she going to do? Looking for abuse. Even if she wants to attract other people's attention, there is no need to use this kind of method, right? Sure enough, she is a love-struck fool. She would do anything for Lord Murong. You're saying that she is doing all this for Murong Changfeng. Suddenly, a sinister chuckle entered the room without warning. Chapter 32. The young girls who were gossiping excitedly suddenly blushed. They shyly looked at Nangong Lai's handsome face and whispered, "Does young master know? That woman is very clingy to Lord Murong. Every day, she thinks of ways to surround Lord Murong. She annoyed Lord Murong so much that he broke off the engagement. Yet she still shamelessly followed him to White Academy. Now, she must have heard that Lord Murong wants to major in martial qi. That's why she fearlessly went to sign up. Is that so?" Nangong Lai curved his thin lips and glanced at the man beside him. His tone carried a sense of schadenfreude. It sounds like they really have deep feelings for each other. Beligaju's hand that was holding the teacup paused. The water in the teacup stirred up a layer of faintly discernible water stains. In the distance, Murong Changfeng, who was being discussed as a target, was introducing the Hellion Jiaoer to several masters. At this moment, he saw that the masters' gazes were all looking at him thoughtfully. He only felt a burst of embarrassment. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw this, she turned her eyes. Her beautiful eyes rippled. "Lord Murong, don't blame sister. Her martial qi is not good. Her heart is also anxious, so she thought of such a countermeasure. I'm afraid she wants to borrow Lord Murong's glory. Trash will always be trash." Murong Changfeng indifferently said, as if he was only stating a fact. However, he didn't notice that Grandmaster Zizun, who was sitting at the top, was furrowing his brows. He seemed to be doing his best to suppress the anger in his heart. Trash. This group of blind little brats dared to call his good disciple a piece of trash. If she was trash, then they were mud. They couldn't even be called objects. "Zizun, this is the disciple I mentioned to you before. Come, Changfeng. Quickly come and greet the master." Murong Changfeng was delighted. He was just about to step forward and salute. Zizun coldly interrupted him. "This old man can't accept Lord Murong's compliments. That year, wasn't the Hellion family destroyed by such compliments? This old man can forget about it." Everyone stared blankly. They really didn't understand why Zizun was fine just now, but now his temper suddenly flared up. Furthermore, he even mentioned the Hellion family. The smile on Murong Changfeng's face was also somewhat stiff. He was the noble heir of the prince's mansion. When had he ever received this kind of treatment? However, he knew that the person in front of him was not someone else, but rather the sovereign who was known as the state preceptor. This old man's temper was even more unpredictable than his master's. It was hard to please him. The Hellion Jiaoer wholeheartedly wanted to help Murong Xiaofeng out of this predicament. She spoke in a clear and melodious voice, great master mentioned the Hellion family. Do you know my father? Of course I know. The supreme martial artist slowly stroked his white beard. The Hellion Jower smiled and was about to use this opportunity to get closer to him. The supreme martial artist continued coldly, after marrying into the family, you still don't know your place. Bringing an outsider into the family is a classic example of betraying kindness. How can this old man not recognize you? Finishing his words, Ji-zoon stood up, flicked his sleeves and left. Although that disciple of his didn't say anything, he, the supreme being, wasn't senile. Obviously, they were both daughters of the Hellion family. One lived such a pampered and comfortable life, while the other had to earn her own money to pay the entrance fee. What kind of character Hellion Guangyao was, one could see clearly from this matter. However, I have to thank them for their ruthlessness. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to meet my dear disciple so quickly. And that Murong Changfeng, I'm sure my disciple has already clearly seen his nature and knows that this kind of man is not acceptable. Thinking like this, the supreme martial artist more or less felt a little better. His disciple was a natural-born genius. A man who could match her must also be unique in this world. That's right. Some time ago, didn't the retired emperor say that he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to choose a consort for that stinky brat who only knows how to lie in the ghost palace all day? Maybe I can let my disciple go and try. The supreme martial artist muttered to himself while secretly thinking in his heart. Speaking of which, that stinky brat should have already entered the superior compound. Why didn't he see him at the superior compound after 2 days? Could it be that he didn't enter the superior compound? No, that's impossible. No matter how arrogant that stinky brat is, he still more or less listens to the retired emperor's words. Moreover, when he was asked to re-enter the superior compound, he had a, it doesn't matter, it's just a change of place to sleep attitude. He shouldn't have not come. Then where in the world is he now? The test results are no. The teacher held the ancient scroll in his hand. The entire page was completely blank. He raised his head and looked at the tall figure in front of him. His eyebrows furrowed. You haven't tested even once before. Yes. Beligaju answered indifferently. The light and shadow passed through the branches and shattered on his face. Under the reflection of the morning sun, his bright and clean chin appeared even more arrogant and handsome. The teacher really couldn't stand these new students from the inferior compound. He waved his hand. Since it's like this, you go to the crystal ball and test it first. Then decide what you want to major in. No need. Beligaju's voice was cold, without the slightest trace of emotion. I choose martial chi. Another person from the inferior compound wants to major in martial chi. The teacher's heart was already blocked to a certain extent. Holding the brush in his hand, his face turned green as he growled. Next. The next one was Nangong Lai. Needless to say, you also want to choose martial chi, right? Nangong Lai wickedly shook his finger. The teacher thought that there was finally someone who knew his place. He was just about to take the medicine. He heard the person laugh hedonistically. I want to choose divination. It said that there are a lot of girls there. The teacher was speechless. Are you here to learn something or to pick up girls? No matter what, in a compound with the worst aptitude, there were actually 2 people who whimsically chose martial chi. And the other person even more strangely chose divination. One must know that in the Dragon War Empire, divination masters were the same as martial cultivation masters. Both were very selective. Not everyone could master it. Was this person sure that he could? Or was it that he only chose divination for the sake of showing off? These people from the inferior compound were simply too much. This year's new students are really a mix of good and bad. The teacher recorded while shaking his head. Don't say that he had thoughts about the new students from the inferior compound. It was because their foundation was too poor. During the test, they wouldn't be given any opportunity to shrink back. Another teacher disdainfully curled his lips. Perhaps this is the difference between the inferior compound and the superior compound. Some people just don't know the height of the heavens and the depth of the earth. They are too arrogant. The superior compound is different. My God, you don't know how high that Hellion Zhao's martial qi is. For the academy, it can be considered a pleasant surprise. No wonder the dean looked so happy recently. Unlike those three people from the inferior compound, they were simply too arrogant. It was estimated that they didn't need to wait until a month later. They would be eliminated in advance during the test. The result was already very obvious. These three people simply wouldn't be able to go far. Chapter 33. At night, in the worst courtyard of the White Academy, the young girl flipped her hands, and the surroundings seemed to have a transparent airflow, covering her entire body. Yuan Ming's arrogant voice was full of surprise. Woman, I didn't expect you to be a manipulation-type martial artist. Manipulation-type martial artist. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. In her memory, martial artists were only divided into stages: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The higher the stage, the darker the color of martial qi. What was a manipulation-type martial artist? This was the first time she heard of it. Yuan Ming looked at her, the corners of his mouth half curved. According to the average person's point of view, the element and color of martial qi determines the level of a martial artist's ability. The lighter the color, the worse the aptitude. But, speaking to this point, he paused, his lips carrying an evil smile. Manipulation-type martial artists are the only exception in the world. Not only are they not in the five elements, even when emitting martial qi, they don't have any color, but they can manipulate the five elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. They are the martial artist with the strongest attack power. Sounds good. Hellion Vivian lazily put a strawberry in her mouth, and casually took the wooden basin. Yuan Ming saw her so calm, and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Did this woman know what the innate talent she possessed meant? It was simply a reckless waste of natural resources. It wasn't that Wei didn't care at all, but her whole body was sticky and flustered, so she wanted to take a bath. In order to avoid seeing anything that she shouldn't see again, before she entered the hot spring pool, she deliberately knocked on the door and looked around. She guessed that everyone should be busy practicing martial qi right now, and practicing martial qi, so there shouldn't be anyone else coming. Only then did she undo her clothes and step into the clear pool. The pool water was up to her neck. Wei didn't move at all, so quiet that it was as if she was sleeping. Her silk-like black hair draped over her porcelain-white back just like that, appearing exceptionally alluring. Just at this moment, a cold air suddenly approached. There was someone. Hellion Vivian abruptly opened her eyes. Her hands pushed against the side of the pool, and in an instant, she jumped out of the wooden barrel. A white cotton gown that was placed beside the pool flew up into the air. Hellion Vivian flipped sideways, and her hands and feet drilled into the gown in an instant. His left hand reached out from his sleeve, and just happened to tie the last belt of his clothes. The whole movement was smooth and swift, and the water droplets on his hair gradually dripped everywhere. At this time, a shadow gradually appeared in the fog. That person was icy cold, aloof, and proud. She stood alone, and her beauty was untainted by a single speck of dust. He was holding an ancient scroll in his hand, standing by the edge of the pool and looking down. His left shoulder was outlined by a black line. It was so beautiful that even the heavens and the earth were eclipsed. Who else could it be but Beligaju? When Hellion Vivian saw that it was him, she took her things and was about to leave. Unexpectedly, the sky and earth spun. The moment she stretched out her hand, Beligaju pressed her whole body against the stone wall. In an instant, the man's simple and elegant orchid scent entered her nose. It was not thick, and there was no smell of dust. It was not like the orchid scent in the bathroom. The fragrance was long, and it was rather heavy and simple. He supported his arms on both sides of her. His dark hair was like the best brocade, coldly rubbing against her face, blocking the dim light. "What are you doing?" Helene Vivian did not expect that he would do such a thing. Her long, shapely eyebrows slightly raised. Wasn't the conflict between her and him already resolved? Beligaju looked at her. His gaze moved inch by inch from her wet hair to her neck, collarbone, and his eyes darkened. "I said that I will give you more services." The man's voice was deep, and his pair of eyes were so deep that it was easy for people to fall into them. His slightly hot breath sprayed on her slender body, scorching and seductive, making her feel numb and itchy. "Since you paid me, of course I have to keep my word. Otherwise, how can I be worthy of your 20 taels?" His voice was clear, but his evil smile was bewitching. Hearing this, Wei Wei stared blankly for a moment. Like lightning, she reached out and held Bailey Jiaju's wrist. After that, she gently pushed him away. The corners of her mouth carried a smile. That day was merely an accident. "It's only right for me to pay you money. You don't need to do anything else." Hearing the 4 words, "keep your distance," Bailey Jiaju suddenly laughed, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. His amber pupils were suffused with an ice-cold light. Helene Vivian did not look at him again. She turned around and walked out of the bamboo house to avoid any bad rumors. She was fine with it, but she didn't like to implicate others. After all, in ancient times, reputation was very important. These people spent so much energy and money to enter the school. First, they wanted to succeed in this place. Second, they wanted to make friends with the upper class. Among these girls, many of them wanted to fly up the branch and become a phoenix. Who was close to whom, who could not be offended, and who must be fawned over, everyone knew in their hearts. So, she had a premonition that Helene Jiao and her group would not let her go so easily. The night outside the window was getting darker and darker. It was so heavy that it seemed like splashed ink couldn't be melted. Beligaju was still standing in the bamboo house. His pair of eyes were floating, as if they were brewing ice. He casually placed his free hand on the stone wall. It was clearly a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. When Nangong Lai came in, he saw this scene. He shook his head with an evil aura. "Chi Chi. This is the first time that a woman was not tempted by you. It seems that our little kitten still doesn't have much yearning for his highness." Beligaju's slender index finger brushed past the thumb ring on his hand. He glanced at Nangong Lai. His elegance revealed a kind of alienation. It was difficult to approach him, and it made people fascinated. Seeing that he didn't have any reaction, Nangong Lai simply continued to speak. "No wonder people say that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family is dead set on that heir of the Murong family. I feel that maybe it's really like this. Otherwise, she wouldn't." He hadn't finished speaking when he was frightened by Beligaju's expression. That pair of bewitching cold eyes coldly stared at him. Step by step, he walked closer. That appearance was like a poisonous snake, not allowing people to say another word. Accompanied by a snap sound, Beligaju's young and strong figure slowly walked out of the bamboo house. He thoroughly became a creature of the night. Nangong Lai stared blankly in place. He looked at the shattered thumb ring on the ground. His mouth was wide open, and he didn't move at all. He was just angry. Chapter 34. In the darkness, Beligaju slowly walked. His entire person looked calm, yet emitted an extremely dangerous aura. A rustling sound came from the jungle, as if something was following him. Beligaju's footsteps paused, his voice cold, "Come out." Little bald head stiffened. With a tiger face and a meat bun in his mouth, his shoulders drooped as he revealed his human form. His small face carried a unique arrogance. "Brother." Bailey Jia Ju faintly hummed in agreement. It turned out that this little bald head was none other than Beligaju's seventh prince from the same mother and father, Bailey Kong Chin. The little one scratched his own ear, incomparably adorable. "Brother, why didn't you go to the superior compound?" "Imperial grandfather has always been asking me." "Your superior compound woke up too early." Beligaju lazily lifted his eyelids. Without moving his expression, he swept his gaze over his exposed lotus root-like arms. His eyebrows slightly raised. "What did you do wrong?" Little Kong Chin lowered his head to look at those little gravity buckles and hid behind him. "I beat up the martial uncles of the superior compound." That group of old men gathered together and only knew how to gossip all day long. They actually said that brother wasn't qualified to major in martial chi. "They don't know me." Beligaju pried open his small meaty fist. With a crack, those gravity buckles fell to the ground. Little bald head's face was full of vigor. Soon after, he pouted somewhat aggrievedly, "But master said that using brute force to fight is wrong. As punishment, I can't eat meat for a week." "Shadow." "Then what are you holding in your hands? Don't think that you can lie just because you're the seventh prince." "Shadow." After Beligaju heard this, his expression didn't change at all. He put those gravity buckles on his wrist and said neither quickly nor slowly, "Go get some beef jerky." "Yes." Shadow's figure flashed, and in a short while, he came back with a paper bag. Little Kong Chin took it. His tiger eyes lit up as he took 2 big bites. While chewing the beef in his mouth, he didn't forget to tip him off. "Brother, you'd better hurry up and transfer to the superior compound. There are a few ministers' sons over there who don't know your identity. They've always wanted to find trouble with you. They even found me here and encouraged me to fight with you." Humph, they're simply too stupid. Let's go back after we finish eating." Beligaju's tone was very calm. Little Kong Chin lowered his eyes in disappointment. After a while, he raised his head again. "Brother, I followed master into the palace yesterday." Beligaju brushed the non-existent dust off his body and waited for him to continue. Little Kong Chin asked seriously, "Are you really going to choose an imperial concubine?" Beligaju's fingers paused. "No. But Imperial Grandfather said that this martial chi test is to prepare for you to choose an imperial concubine. Imperial Father has agreed to it." Little Kong Chen's cheeks bulged as he ate. His big eyes were full of light. "Brother, you must choose a good cook, or else you'll starve." "Shadow." Seventh prince, do you think that everyone is like you, a foodie?" Beligaju took off his outer robe and put it on the little one. Then he said, "I know, let's go back. Brother, they all said that you sold yourself to a woman. That woman didn't like you, but that Lord Murong. Is this true?" Shadow suddenly shivered. "Seventh prince, seventh prince, why didn't you ask about other things? Why did you have to ask this question?" Beligaju paused. He reached out and put his hand into his pocket. When he lowered his head, he could see his firm and powerful skin. It was perfect and eye-catching. "Hellion Wei Wei." He chuckled softly as he read out these 4 words. The tip of his tongue lightly licked his thin lips as a bloodthirsty smile blossomed at the corners of his mouth. The north wind whistled past, rolling up his fluttering cloak, revealing that handsome face that could make people gasp at any time, indifferent and cold to the point that people couldn't even feel the slightest bit of warmth. The next day, a gentle breeze blew. The sky was clear and the air was refreshing. If one were to say what was the most interesting part of the entrance exam, it would be none other than the martial arts competition. It was said that the martial arts competition this time was personally overseen by Grandmaster Zizun. The superior compound's genius Murong Changfeng was the referee. The top 3 martial artists would have the qualifications to be transferred to the superior compound from the other compounds. Those who failed would be eliminated. Therefore, the people of the good and good compounds all gathered their energy for the sake of being able to enter the world's most powerful superior compound. You guys look, those 2 people from the inferior compound really came. Everyone didn't restrain themselves at all as they covered their faces and laughed. Hellion May coldly humphed. Forget about that young master. I really don't understand why that good-for-nothing would blindly join in on the fun. Third sister, how many times have I told you? That's the eldest sister after all. When Hellion Jiao was in front of people, she would always have a brotherly affection. Everyone only thought that she was kind-hearted and liked her even more. Second miss, she's just a good-for-nothing. Why are you speaking up for her? We've all heard that she used to bully you quite a bit. That's right, second sister. Look at that good-for-nothing's arrogant appearance. Maybe a miracle will happen. It can't be like last time, where she can't even light up the crystal ball, right? Then she'll really make a fool of herself, ha ha ha. Hellion May laughed, the ridicule in her tone was very strong. Hellion Jiao pretended to glare at her. When she looked at Hellion Vivian, she had a pitiful appearance. Eldest sister will do her best. After all, you don't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Even if the result isn't ideal, you shouldn't randomly throw a tantrum. These words sounded like they were for Hellion Vivian's good, but in reality, every sentence was reminding everyone that this good-for-nothing had made a fool of herself in the past. Everyone present knew that last time during the martial chi test, Hellion Vivian was really unspeakably embarrassed. She used all her strength to touch the crystal ball. Even when she tried to inject chi, she was sweating profusely and swaying. She put in so much effort, but in the end, that crystal ball only produced a little bit of gas, which was basically negligible. Even if that wasn't enough, she still insisted on being in the same group as Murong Changfeng. When they stood on the competition stage, other people only raised their fists and were sent flying by her. In short, Hellion Vivian, this good-for-nothing, was a joke. If this joke stopped here, the bystanders wouldn't say anything. However, this joke didn't even have the least bit of self-awareness. She was always swaying in front of them. This time, in order to attract Murong Changfeng's attention, she recklessly came to compete in martial chi. She was really tired of living, not wanting to give face. This time's test, even if they used their toes to think, they would know the result. The last place would definitely be Hellion Vivian, that good-for-nothing. Hellion Vivian naturally knew what kind of gazes the surrounding people were using to look at her. That kind of mixed ridicule and disdain, she was all too familiar with it. However, she didn't care at all. She even lazily yawned. That smile brought out a languid and noble air, which was even more outstanding. Even though she was in such a huge hall, she was still able to capture everyone's gaze at the first instance. Chapter 35. Was it her misperception? That slut's face seemed to be a little whiter. Hellion May was extremely unhappy that the good-for-nothing had stolen her limelight. A cold light flitted across her eyes. I don't know what kind of person that good-for-nothing received guidance from in the end. She actually looks a little different now. Sister, don't worry. Hellion Jiao looked left and right. Seeing that there was no one around, she patted Hellion Jiao's hand and softly said, elder sister has already helped you arrange everything. You and that good-for-nothing will be in the same group. Even if you don't do anything, during the test, you can still make her lose face. She can't even ignite the crystal ball. Hellion May thought of that scene, the corners of her mouth hooked up, her eyes filled with poison. I announce that the martial chi test officially begins. Following this sentence, the white-haired old man and Murong Changfeng stood up from their wooden chairs at the same time, their sacred white robes fluttering. The wind from all directions also seemed to be still, filled with a mysterious smell, making people unconsciously restrain their mind. A cylindrical transparent object slowly rose from the center of the main hall, its whole body was silver, emitting a faint light. And on top of it, a crystal ball of about the same size was closely glued to it, clean and transparent beyond imagination. Everyone went up the stage one by one, as if they were in the modern world. As long as they placed their hands on the crystal ball, they activated the true power in their body and poured it into the crystal ball. The special material of the crystal ball would reflect the corresponding attribute. If it was gold, the crystal ball would become a bright yellow. If it was fire attribute, the crystal ball would become a fiery red fireball. The level of the attribute would depend on the degree of light the crystal ball emitted. The brighter it was, the higher the martial chi, and the dimmer it was, the lower the martial chi. Hellion Vivian looked at the crystal ball that was sometimes bright and sometimes dark, the reflected light filled the surroundings. There was only one thought in her mind: wait until the day she left White Academy, she must take this crystal ball with her. Such a good quality crystal ball with perfect corners was not commonly seen. Beligaju, who was sitting not far away, glanced in her direction. His deep eyes seemed to be able to see through everyone. Hellion Vivian didn't care that he had seen through her thoughts. The corners of her mouth curled up, and her eyes sparkled. Bailey Jiaju took note of her actions and raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything and only leisurely turned the teacup in his hand. Between his thin lips, there was a hint of playfulness. Next group, Divisions Hellion May vs Hellion Vivian. Murong Changfeng's clear and cold voice sounded. It was neither flat nor light, as if he was carrying out some kind of sacred matter. Only, it was clear that this time, his voice carried a faint disdain. Hellion Wei Wei stood up from her seat and leisurely tidied up her left sleeve. Her expression was indifferent as she lazily stretched her waist. Everyone's gazes were once again cast over. They looked at this woman who possessed the Hellion clan's only bloodline, but didn't have any martial chi. Their eyes were full of ridicule. Hellion May faced all around and smiled. Her face carried an unconcealable complacency. When she walked in front of Hellion Vivian, she coldly smiled. "Slut, you haven't become stupid from looking at Lord Murong again, right? I advise you to stop daydreaming. Do you know who the great master standing on top is?" Hellion Vivian glanced at the old man standing next to the crystal ball. It was very clear that Hellion May wasn't very interested in this topic. Hellion May couldn't stand this kind of attitude of hers. With a condescending arrogance, she said, "That is Dragon War Empire's most powerful great master. He has a strength that you can't reach even if you spend your whole life. However, this kind of person is different to Second Sister. You still want to vainly compare yourself to Second Sister, simply laughable." Hellion Vivian's fingers paused for a moment. This small movement naturally didn't escape Hellion May's eyes. She raised her chin, and her voice carried a sense of complacency. "Ha, now you know to be afraid. It is said that this great master's identity is hidden very deeply, and he doesn't easily reveal himself. This time, he definitely appeared for Second Sister. Hee, don't use this kind of expression to look at me. Presumably, you haven't even seen this great master before." Hellion Vivian didn't speak. She only raised her eyes to look at the old man who was looking at her. The corners of her mouth slightly hooked up. How should she tell Hellion May that the great master she spoke of that she hadn't even seen before was actually her master? Hellion May saw that Hellion Vivian lowered her head, and the complacency in her heart became even stronger. This woman still had times when she was afraid. That couldn't be better. However, she didn't see the smile on Hellion Vivian's face when she lowered her head. The curve of her lips slowly widened. There was ridicule, indifference, depth, and nonchalance. The only thing that wasn't there was fear. At this time, the two people had already walked to the side of the crystal ball. Hellion May put away the ridicule on her face from before, and faced the two elders with a very innocent smile. She bowed very politely. Hello to the two elders. Compared to Hellion May, Hellion Vivian was clearly more indifferent. The Grand Master blew his beard and glared, and his expression was very aggrieved. He thought that his obedient disciple would be very happy to see him here, and would immediately throw herself into his arms, making those people jealous to death. But how could his disciple be so cold? Could it be that she didn't like him coming to see her test? Thinking about it, this disciple of his had always been very low-key. She had even warned him not to announce their relationship. Sigh. It wasn't easy to accept a disciple, but he couldn't acknowledge her. Cough. Hellion Vivian put her hand to her mouth, and did her best to ignore the Grand Master's resentful gaze. Her voice was indifferent. Before the test, I want to speak a few words with the Grand Master alone. It was very obvious that Murong Changfeng didn't expect Hellion Vivian to make such a request. After a slight daze, his eyes were filled with disgust. Everyone curled their lips in disdain, because Hellion Vivian's current actions were undoubtedly fawning in their eyes. Their gazes towards her became more and more disdainful. They were just waiting for this good-for-nothing to make a fool of herself. One must know that the Grand Master's temper was very strange. In his eyes, he didn't have the concept of loving the younger generation. What he despised the most was this kind of person who stuck close to him. Let's see how the Grand Master will deal with her in a moment. Only Beligaju, who was sitting on the wooden chair, changed his posture. The finger supporting his chin tapped his chin, and slightly raised his eyes. As if he sensed something, an unknown light flashed through his eyes. Murong Changfeng seemed like he didn't want to say a single word to Hellion Vivian. He wrinkled his thick eyebrows and was just about to open his mouth. He heard the Grand Master's deep voice. Fine. A single word blocked all of Murong Changfeng's words. However, seeing that the Grand Master's complexion was so ugly, he was definitely angered by that good-for-nothing. Murong Changfeng rejoiced once again that he had broken off the engagement. Because this kind of woman, who would rush forward to curry favor with anyone, was really not worthy of him. Chapter 36. Hellion Vivian did not care about how the crowd looked at her. She turned around and lowered her voice. She whispered into the old man's ear, "No matter what happens later, Master, pretend that you don't know me." "Disciple, are you really not going to give me a proper name?" Master's heart is already cold. The more the old man spoke, the more resentful his expression became. Hellion Vivian saw Hellion May leaning over and hurriedly ended the topic. "Remember what I said." "Chee." Hellion May coldly snorted and used a voice that only the two of them could hear to say, "Don't think that just because the Great Master gave you time, you have the opportunity to curry favor with him. The Great Master won't fall for your tricks. Just wait and see. In a moment, the Great Master will open his mouth and ask you to get lost from this martial chi test. Where do you think this is? A good-for-nothing dares to come here. Who is the good-for-nothing, we will know after we compete." Facing Hellion May's provocation, Hellion Vivian raised her eyes. Her cold and arrogant aura became very overwhelming as she raised her eyebrows. Hellion May looked at the figure that walked past her. That kind of indifferent attitude was as if she did not put her in her eyes at all. Despicable. Hellion May gritted her teeth. She could not wait to tear Hellion Vivian into pieces on the spot. She raised her head. The corner of her eyes carried a trace of a smile. Let me test first. I'm afraid that big sister still needs to prepare. I think she has already forgotten how to use her chi. I can also give big sister a demonstration. Hellion May's tone was a little high. Even if she wanted to cover it up, she could not suppress the strong sense of ridicule. Her purpose was very clear. She wanted to test her own martial chi first and then let Hellion Vivian test it. With a comparison, she could show the incompetence of this good-for-nothing Hellion Vivian. As smart as Hellion Vivian was, how could she not know what the other party was thinking? She curved her thin lips and didn't waste her time on who would test first. To her, it didn't matter who tested first. Hellion May faced Wei Wei's direction and glanced complacently. After that, she took a step forward and jumped onto the stone platform. Everyone's state of mind shook, and all of them placed their gazes on her body. Although this Hellion May wasn't a genius like Hellion Jiaoer, she was still an extremely powerful martial artist. She had just entered the academy, and she had already obtained first place among the good students. It could be said that she was the best choice to enter the superior compound in this time's martial chi test. As if enjoying the feeling of being the center of attention, Hellion May raised her chin and placed her hand on the transparent crystal ball. In an instant, a deep sea fog rose from the bottom of the crystal ball, emitting a bright light. In that instant, the crowd surged up. Its water rank level 5. Heavens! It was actually water rank. It's very difficult for an average new student to reach this height. Worthy of being the Hellion family's young miss. Hellion May looked at the effect she created with satisfaction. With a complacent expression, she withdrew her hand from the crystal ball, and her face couldn't hide the smile on it. She turned her head and looked at Hellion Vivian. Although her face was smiling, the words that came out of her mouth carried a tone that made people uncomfortable. Big sister, come and try too. If you don't want to try, you can give up on the test. After all, in front of this many people, losing face is very difficult to get back. As soon as he heard this, Grandmaster Zizun immediately became angry. His eyes were wide open, and he secretly said in his heart, "Humph, a little water rank is so arrogant. It's fine if you're immensely proud of yourself, but you still have to come and trample on my good disciple. How can you be like this? This matter can't be tolerated." Grandmaster Zizun was just about to do something when he saw his own disciple cast a warning look at him. Helpless, he could only obediently sit back down again, extremely unhappy. As if he sensed the change in the old man's mood, Baligaju, who was hidden below the stage, glanced at him, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more intense. Sure enough, the little thing recognized that old man. Grandmaster Zizun still didn't know that a certain highness that he was constantly thinking about was watching him from the crowd. The people below the stage could see clearly, and the people on the stage could see clearly. Therefore, at this time, Grandmaster Zizun's mind was full of thoughts. With his own disciple's intelligence and wisdom, she would definitely surpass that girl who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Therefore, Grandmaster Zizun proudly rolled up his sleeves, and with a solemn voice, he called out, "Hellion Vivian, come up." As soon as people heard his angry tone, they looked at Hellion Vivian with even more understanding and ridicule. This good-for-nothing was indeed disliked by others. Just now, she wanted to hug Grandmaster Zizun's thigh, but now, even Grandmaster Zizun saw her face clearly. Hellion Vivian, on the other hand, had a relaxed smile. Stretching her body, she slowly walked towards the crystal bowl. When she passed by her master, her footsteps didn't even stop for a moment. This made the Hellion Jiaoer, who was sitting at the side, curve her thin lips. This lowly woman was simply seeking her own death. Grandmaster Zizun already had an opinion of her, yet she was still so arrogant. She'll have a good time in a while. Hellion Vivian didn't care at all. She extended her white jade-like palm and placed it on the crystal bowl. The Hellion Jower held her tea and gracefully took a sip. Her eyes were full of ridicule. No matter how presentable she was still just a good-for-nothing. Just extending your hand isn't enough. You have to pour your qi into the crystal bowl. Don't you understand these things? Murong Changfang's increasingly impatient words caused a wave of ridicule. It can't be. This good-for-nothing still doesn't know how to test her qi. You guys forgot. She's just here to make a fool of herself. We just need to watch. It's not good to have such high expectations for a good-for-nothing. Ha ha ha. The ridicule grew louder and louder, like a tide, surging in all directions. It was especially ear-piercing. Hellion Vivian didn't even move an inch. She still had a lazy appearance. Beligaju playfully raised his eyebrows. If a normal girl was ridiculed like this, she would have already come down from the testing platform. At the very least, she would feel embarrassed. Looking at her again, her face was calm and indifferent. It seemed like she was laughing, but also seemed like she was ridiculing. What was she ridiculing? Beligaju wanted to take a closer look, but saw her 5 fingers tremble. Her qi slightly surged towards the center of her palm. The crystal ball made a whoosh sound, and fog rose from all directions. An unknown wind rushed in from all directions. It whistled past, making a buzzing sound. The surrounding air was actually affected. The old man subconsciously looked towards the direction of Hellion Vivian. A trace of disbelief suddenly flashed through his heart. No, it shouldn't be possible. His disciple actually, the north wind whistled past. The people standing below the platform only felt their cheeks hurt. It took a lot of effort for them to clearly see the changes in the crystal ball. Hellion Vivian gently smiled. Her black hair fluttered in the wind. She was indescribably handsome. Chapter 37. If people looked carefully, they would discover that the wind was completely under her control. However, other than Supreme Martial Artist, who had reached an unbounded level, no one would notice this kind of subtle difference. No, there might be one more person. Only, that person's expression wasn't as obvious as Grandmaster Supreme's. Instead, his deep eyes narrowed, bewitchingly cold and wanton. As for the others, they all cared about what kind of light the crystal ball would emit, and how dazzling it would be. However, nothing in the crystal ball lit up. Instead, a layer of white fog surged. Woman, you can actually control the wind. Wind is the most difficult attribute to control. Hearing Yuan Ming's pleasantly surprised cry, Hellion Vivian finally retracted her hand. That crystal ball was already as clean as before, without the slightest bit of impurity. Hellion Mei stood at the side, covering her mouth as she lightly laughed. I thought that a miracle would happen with the sound just now. In the end, it didn't even light up. Hellion Jower seemed to be waiting for this result. She looked at Hellion Mei as if complaining, "Third sister, you're talking nonsense again. Eldest sister has already tried her best, you don't need to say anything more. Second sister is right. Making eldest sister light up the crystal ball is simply making things difficult for her." The two sisters, one playing the good cop and the other playing the bad cop, thoroughly ridiculing Hellion Vivian. The new students below the stage also laughed, their voices so loud that almost the entire courtyard could hear them. Beligaju's peach blossom eyes faintly raised, his lips forming a stunning arc. It's only a test ball, yet it actually made these people believe it without a doubt. The contempt on his lips was very deep, as if he was mocking, yet also as if he was pondering. Seeing the arc on the side of his master's face, and he couldn't help but shiver. He didn't know who was going to be unlucky again, and it was going to be extremely unlucky. Sitting on the stage, the more Grandmaster listened, the uglier his expression became. He saw through the two sisters' tricks, and anger couldn't help but rise in his heart. Bullying his good disciple so brazenly, did they treat him as a dead person? His good disciple was so good. She was smart, knew how to earn money, and even knew how to make armaments to make him happy. She didn't care if he taught her anything, and just took care of him like an old man. Isn't it just that the crystal ball didn't light up? What's the big deal? Moreover, this group of people simply did not understand how amazing his disciple's talent was. The supreme martial artist was so angry that his eyes widened. Even his white beard stood up. Just as he was about to take a step forward, he saw Wei Wei raise her hand and wave her sleeves. Her wide clothes were like invulnerable satin. Next to the crystal ball, they bloomed enchantingly. Her thin lips very very slowly curved up. After the test is over, let's start the competition while the wind still hasn't stopped. Martial arts competition. Ha! What did I just hear? This piece of trash wants to compete with me. Hellion Mate dug her ears and laughed mockingly. I advise Big Sister to go down early, so that I won't beat you until you kneel and beg for mercy. After Hellion Vivian heard her words, she didn't get angry. Instead, she strolled over. Her body slightly leaned forward, and the corner of her mouth curved up into an evil arc. Then let's try. Let's see who will kneel and beg for mercy in the end. Hellion Vivian's voice was originally relatively clear. Resounding in the courtyard that was full of mocking laughter, there was actually a kind of breathtaking feeling that broke out of its shell. Since Big Sister is so impatient, then as a younger sister, I can only fulfill your wish. Fulfill your wish of going to hell. Hellion May narrowed her eyes, and her whole body emitted layers of watery mist. Seeing this scene, even more people didn't believe that Hellion Vivian would win. Because everyone knew that this was a competition without any suspense. Even if Hellion Vivian had martial chi, with her current ability, it was impossible for her to defeat a water-class expert. Moreover, she didn't even have the ability to light up the crystal ball. How could she dare to overestimate herself and propose a martial arts competition? The atmosphere in the courtyard was getting thicker and thicker. They were all waiting to see how that trash would be crippled. Hellion May was even more ruthless. She directly took out an extremely lethal long whip. When the tail of the whip swept across the ground, it made a sound that made everyone feel pain. I'll give you a whip and directly end you. After saying that, Hellion May's wrist turned. The long whip soared, as if it could tear apart the wind, and with a whistling sound, it whipped towards Hellion Vivian. That kind of fast speed, no one could evade. Everyone thought in their hearts, if this whip fell, Hellion Wei Wei's face would definitely be ruined. However, what they didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian actually supported herself with one hand and beautifully flipped upside down. Using the rotation of her legs, she wrapped around the long whip. Hellion May's expression changed. She coldly snorted and quickly retracted the long whip. You have a lot of tricks. However, the game ends here. Go to hell. Paw. The long whip swung towards the sky. A violent wind blew, and true power surged. Countless amounts of water vapor wreaked havoc in the air. However, the target was only one person. Hellion Vivian. Seeing this scene, not only did Grandmaster wrinkle his eyebrows, even the Dean, Tusu Feng, who was watching from afar, shook his head in disapproval. Generally speaking, when facing a competitor with a great disparity in strength, one wouldn't kill them all. However, right now, Hellion May actually used her greatest killing move to deal with Hellion Vivian. This time, Hellion Vivian wouldn't just simply lose the competition. She would very likely lose her life. Hellion May complacently looked at the helpless Hellion Vivian who was tied up by the water vapor. She just knew that this trash wouldn't have the slightest bit of resistance under her hands. Right now, as long as she used a little bit of strength, she would immediately die. Wait a minute. That slut is laughing. At this kind of time, she's actually laughing. The wind has finally started. Hellion Vivian was indeed laughing. One of her hands was in her pocket, while the other was in the air. Feeling the flow of the air, her thin lips slightly curved, looking both handsome and demonic. The wind has started. What wind has started? This trash shouldn't have been scared silly, right? The freshmen simply couldn't understand what Hellion Vivian was saying. Once again, they roared with laughter. However, right at this moment, Hellion Vivian's figure suddenly stopped. Following that, like a phantom, she closed in, bringing along a strong wind that made people's breathing sluggish. Without waiting for Hellion May to react, an ice-cold feeling came from her neck. That cold and sharp edge made Hellion May's expression change in a flash. How could this be? She clearly didn't feel any martial chi from the opponent's body. How in the world did this trash break through her defense? Her black pupils slowly widened because she didn't dare to believe it. Hellion May looked at Hellion Vivian who was pinching her throat, her face extremely pale. The first time she was beaten by this trash, it was completely because she didn't expect her to dare to counterattack. In addition, at that time, she had to maintain her image, so she didn't even use martial chi. But this time, it was really because it was too fast. Everything was too fast, so fast that even her four limbs seemed to have become stiff. Chapter 38. Hellion Jower, who was sitting at the side, realized that something was wrong. She shouted at Hellion May, "Sister, what are you doing? Hurry up and move." Hellion May still maintained her previous posture. She couldn't even lift her hand. She wanted to move, but the pressure coming from all directions made her only able to stand there. This wind, it seemed to be pressing down on her body. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and grabbed her collar. Her eyes were cold, her features were like frost, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. It was hard to conceal her frivolity. I, Hellion Vivian, have never been a love-struck fool. The Hellion clan has never produced a good-for-nothing. And you have lost. Bang! Hellion May was thrown to her knees. Her black hair was messed up into grass at some point. She cut an extremely sorry figure. One move, only one move, and a 4th-level water rank expert was defeated by her hands. This was simply unheard of. However, this heart-wrenching reality had truly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. For a moment, the entire audience was quiet. So quiet that only the slight sound of the wind could be heard. Except for Baligaju, almost everyone was so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths. Hellion Wei stood on the stone platform, her clear and cold little face only had tranquility, without the slightest trace of complacency and arrogance after victory. The golden sunlight shone in from outside the courtyard, the wind from all 4 directions stirred up the white clothes draped over her body, and her black hair fluttered in the wind. No one dared to call her trash again. This was the first time Hellion Vivian mentioned the Hellion clan in front of everyone. She was using this kind of method to tell the world that she was still here. The Hellion clan was still here. But no one expected that in the near future, Hellion Vivian would use an even more stunning method to tell them that not only was the Hellion clan still here, it could even make a comeback. Murong Changfeng, who was closest to her, had a face of disdain, disgust, and finally shock. Every time his expression changed, his eyes never left Hellion Vivian for a moment. In that split second, it was as if his heart had been struck by something. As the referee, Murong Changfeng was somewhat absent-minded. When Beligaju saw this, his hand that was holding the white jade teacup froze for a moment. The surrounding trees rustled. "Bitch, you tricked me." Hellion May placed her palms on the ground and glared at Hellion Vivian with reddened eyes. Her face was filled with unwillingness. She really lost. Losing was not scary. The most frightening thing was that she still didn't know what had happened. That bitch must have used some underhanded means. Cheating. Hellion Vivian sneered. She bent down and picked up the leaf by her feet. She fiddled with it for a while before throwing it away. A streak of blood immediately appeared on Hellion May's cheek. She looked at him and her eyes shook violently. Hellion Vivian chuckled and patted his face. Her eyes emitted a vicious aura, making everyone present shocked. "Remember, it's not that I don't have the ability to kill you, but that I find your blood dirty." Hearing this, Tu Su Feng's lips curled up in amusement. He remembered that there was once a person who only used one move to become famous in a single battle. And that person wasn't even a water-ranked martial artist, but White Academy's great protector. That year, that person was only 9 years old. When he saw him, he would still call him uncle. Although his tone was very cold, it could still be considered cute, only he didn't know what kind of waves he would set off this time when he came to White Academy. Thinking like this, Tu Su Feng slightly tilted his head and looked meaningfully at that cold and peerless figure in the crowd below the stage. Beligaju didn't even lift his eyes. He lowered his eyes and fiddled with his fur cloak. The corner of Tu Su Feng's mouth twitched. In his eyes, all the people and things in the world couldn't compare to that outer garment of his. Only 10 years had passed and a small ice cube had become a large ice mountain. It was really boring. Actually, that good-for-nothing Miss Hellion didn't seem to be as simple as she looked. Lying on the ground, Hellion May looked at Hellion Vivian, who was surrounded by stars. Her entire face started to distort. She was only lucky. What was this slut so proud of? The surging malice in her heart infected her pair of beautiful eyes. Hellion May lowered her eyes and turned her left hand over. She wanted to take advantage of the time when everyone's attention was focused on Hellion Vivian and use the poisonous wasp to backstab her. That poisonous wasp was a poison unique to the Western region. No matter who it was, they wouldn't be able to detect its existence. People who were bitten by the poisonous wasp wouldn't have any abnormalities or life-threatening dangers. However, the poisonous wasp's venom could consume a bit of the cultivator's martial chi. Such a precious poison shouldn't have been wasted on this good-for-nothing. She wanted to save it for the next match. Since this slut didn't open her eyes, she would let her taste what it meant to be in so much pain that she wished she was dead. However, she still lacked a cover. Thinking of this, Hellion May glanced at the Hellion Jower. The Hellion Jower immediately understood her meaning and slightly leaned her body to block the other's line of sight. Hellion May waved her long sleeve and that poisonous wasp flew out. It was originally a foolproof plan. However, she didn't expect that at this moment, Hellion Vivian would suddenly look back. Behind her, there seemed to be an extra shadow. That shadow's appearance couldn't be seen, but it had a head full of silver hair that made people terrified. Something unexpected happened. That poisonous wasp actually forcibly changed its direction and flew towards her. Hellion May wasn't prepared and in a moment, the poisonous wasp bit her neck. "Ah, no. Don't come over." She couldn't help but scream. Looking at Hellion Vivian, her eyes were filled with fear. When the Hellion Jower heard the sound, she hurriedly ran over. Looking at Hellion May's bloody neck, she was suddenly stunned. Following that, her beautiful eyes filled with pitiful tears. "Eldest sister. What did you do?" "Third sister only helped me say a few words." Even if you resent me, even if you like the air, you can't vent your anger on third sister like this. At this time, people discovered that Hellion May's neck was rotten to the point that it was about to become unbearable. There was a shiny poisonous wasp lying there. That poisonous wasp originally didn't have any color. Right now, it seemed to have absorbed enough martial chi. Its shiny belly moved, making people who saw it feel cold in their hearts. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. It was very clear that they all knew the danger of this poisonous wasp. This thing was very evil. It relied on absorbing martial chi to survive. Although every time it absorbed a person's martial chi, there would be a long period of time where it wouldn't cause trouble. However, once it came into contact with someone, it would certainly absorb all of the martial chi on the martial artist's body. No matter who it was, no one would be able to stop it. Unless the martial artist died, then it would leave the martial artist's skin. This Hellion family's eldest daughter was indeed a vicious and merciless debauchee. Just for a man, she actually used such a sinister method to frame her own biological sister. More and more disgusted gazes shot towards Hellion Vivian one after another, as if the young girl standing in front of them wasn't a human at all, but an evil spirit. Chapter 39. Hellion Wei Wei merely smiled lightly. Her pair of eyes slowly died with a mocking light. Yuan Ming snorted, "These two sisters of yours, they didn't release the poisonous bees to harm you, so they turned around and bit back. I can be considered to have seen their shameless ability. These stupid humans actually believe them, they are idiots." Hellion Zhao naturally couldn't hear Yuan Ming's words. She reached out to support the heavily injured Hellion Mei, crying heartbreakingly, "Eldest sister, in the Defense Department, third sister, and I have always let you have your way. When you bullied me, I also never said anything. Who told you to have the blood of the Hellion clan flowing in your body? But this matter, we can't just let it go like this, there are still laws in this world." Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and coldly looked at her, the corners of her mouth slightly curved. "It seems that second sister and I have the same thoughts. This matter really can't just let it go like this." Today, if it was the Hellion Vivian of the past, encountering this kind of situation, they were bound to frame her like this. People's words were terrible, and the Hellion Zhao used this point to frame Hellion Vivian again and again. Hellion Vivian never knew how to reason with them. But she was no longer the Hellion Vivian of the past who could be fooled by them. Hellion Zhao, this green tea bitch, wanted to scheme against her, her methods were still too inexperienced. She didn't know why, but looking at Hellion Vivian's unmoved side profile, Hellion Zhao faintly felt a chill in her heart. However, things had already reached this point, she didn't believe that this good-for-nothing still had a chance to turn things around. What could she use to gamble with so many people's mouths? Hellion Zhao sneered in her heart, but her face was still like a pear blossom in rain. "I know, you don't like me. No matter how many times I explain, eldest sister will always find trouble with me because of Lord Murong. I can bear it, but third sister is still young. Eldest sister, how can you bear it?" The more she spoke, the sadder she became. When she got to the emotional part, her tears fell like a broken string of pearls. She really put on a good show. When the surrounding men saw this, they couldn't help but want to stand up for her. "I've long heard that a certain young lady is a hedonistic and unreasonable person. Now that I've seen her today, I'm convinced. This kind of girl, even if she was given to me for free, I wouldn't want her. No wonder Lord Murong couldn't help but divorce her." "Don't say that. She's done so much for Murong Rong." "That depends on whether Lord Murong is willing to let her do that." Hearing what was said, Murong Changfeng's body slightly stagnated for a moment. His cold face turned towards Hellion Vivian. "How many times have I told you, you should stop your barbarism, yet you refuse to listen. This time, I definitely won't let you off lightly. When he heard her last time, he thought that this woman had already given up on him. Looking at it now, it was indeed just a trick to play hard to get. Only, he never thought that she would become more and more ruthless for him. Hellion Mei, who was originally bitten by the poisonous bees, heard Murong Changfang's words. Her eyes flashed with a trace of light. Fortunately, second sister's reaction was fast enough. She wouldn't suffer this injury for nothing. Anyway, the poisonous bees were raised by her. When there was no one around, she could take back her martial chi. The most important thing was that slut's road had finally come to an end. Even if she won, so what? She would still be ridiculed by the world. Ha! A good-for-nothing young lady who lost her power also dared to fight with them. She was simply acting recklessly. Yes, we definitely can't let her off lightly. This kind of person doesn't deserve to stay at White Academy. Drive her out. Drive her out. At this time, everyone also echoed one after another. All of them were targeting Hellion Vivian. The corners of Wei Wei's mouth pulled up into a seemingly evil smile. Each and every one of them hated that they couldn't eat her up. It seemed that her charisma was really not small, to be able to make them so united as one. The old man watching from the side was really anxious. He wanted to help but found that he didn't know where to start. He didn't believe that his own disciple would use some poisonous bee to bite people. That girl's temperament had always been mild. She wouldn't do such a shameless thing. But the existence of that poisonous bee was enough to make his obedient disciple speechless. He was really afraid that these people would indiscriminately drive people away. But was that really the case? Would Hellion Vivian be speechless? Not at all. The reason why she didn't speak was because she was thinking. Of course, she wouldn't waste her breath to explain. Because Yuan Ming's existence couldn't be told to anyone. And no matter who it was, they wouldn't believe that Hellion Mei would use a poisonous bee to bite herself. So, rather than wasting time to explain, it was better to directly throw out the evidence for them to see. She believed that the evidence was on Hellion Mei's own body. And Hellion Jiaoer still didn't know anything. She extended her hand to block Murong Changfeng. Lord, please give me face and forgive eldest sister this time. As long as she is willing to kneel down to poor T and apologize to third sister, this matter will be over. After all, we are sisters. I can't bear to see her being driven out like this. After speaking, Hellion Jiaoer lowered her eyes. Her long eyelashes covered her full satisfaction. She didn't forget that a few days ago, that slut almost made her kneel. Today, she wanted to make her pay back all of it. Miss Jiaoer, you're just too kind. This evil girl isn't worthy of your pity. This time, don't say that Lord won't forgive her, even we won't stand by and watch. Everyone's face was full of anger. The dean is also here. We will jointly submit a petition to expel her from the hospital. Facing this kind of aggressiveness, anyone would lack confidence and be somewhat flustered. However, Wei Wei merely smiled as she absent-mindedly played with the leaf in her hand. Does it mean that whoever released the poisonous bees have to be kicked out of the academy? In the distance, Beligaju was planning to appear. When he heard her words, he slightly raised his eyes. His deep eyes overflowed with a thoughtful demonic chill. At this time, Tu Sufeng and the others also rushed over. Beside them was a little bald head holding a meat bun. Who released this? Tu Sufeng looked at the poisonous bee that was full of qi and slightly frowned. A pair of eyes that could see through everything swept over everyone one by one, carrying a suffocating anger. He didn't think that in White Academy, there would be someone who dared to use this kind of poison. Hellion Mei also cried, Dean, you must uphold justice for me. I only said a few words to eldest sister, telling her not to run around Lord Murong, and she released this poisonous bee to bite me. Tusufone calmly listened and suddenly stared at Hellion May. Is it really like this? Hellion May felt a burst of guilty conscience from his stare, but she still insisted, yes. Dean, we just watched from the side. Indeed, it was this new student from the inferior compound who played tricks. Even if she won, this kind of conduct is unacceptable and must be severely punished. The teachers were also on the side. The older students chimed in, their voices also contained a bit of indignation. Hellion Jiao followed and held on to Hellion May's shoulder. Her tone carried a crying voice. Eldest sister only made a mistake in a moment of impulse. Third sister and I don't want to do anything, we only want to protect ourselves. This sentence sounded like she was pleading for Hellion Vivian, but in reality, she blocked all of Hellion Vivian's escape routes. It made it difficult for Tusufone to help Hellion Vivian even if he wanted to. Chapter 40. If it was a normal person who encountered this situation, they would have already panicked. However, Hellion Vivian was calm and composed as she lightly smiled. She was neither arrogant nor impatient. This allowed the old man who was worried about her to calm down. He believed that his disciple was definitely not a vile person. There must be a reason why that poisonous wasp appeared. What was laughable was that those teachers who were also his teachers actually slandered his disciple just because she was from the inferior compound. As if she could feel the old man's anger, Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. Ah, it seems that her family's teacher still trusts her. No matter what, she couldn't disappoint this old man, right? Everyone is saying that this poisonous wasp was released. Why don't you say who raised this poisonous wasp? Hellion Vivian, who hadn't opened her mouth until now, suddenly spoke. Her voice was so cold that it was hard for people to ignore it. Beligaju, who was hiding in the shadows, evilly raised his eyebrows. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a playful gaze. Everyone didn't understand. It was fine if she didn't try to absolve herself, but why did she say such nonsense? As for the main culprit, in the instant that Hellion Vivian said those words, her body completely froze. Impossible. That slut couldn't possibly know that method. Since everyone can't think of who it is, then let me tell everyone. Hellion Vivian's figure suddenly moved. The leaf in her hand danced in the wind, like a small knife cutting through Hellion May's sleeve. Only the sound of cloth rustling could be heard. An embroidered flower made of jade fell to the ground with a thud. That embroidered flower was very small. If it wasn't for its special color, it would have been very hard to notice. Hellion May's face completely paled. She wanted to stand up and continue to make a scene to divert everyone's attention. However, how could Hellion Vivian allow that? She was the first to pick up the embroidered flower and played with it slowly. Her tone was neither fast nor slow. I think all the experienced and knowledgeable teachers should know what this is. Blood jade is a necessity for raising poisonous bees. Because of it, the poisonous bees will be able to settle down and not target people. Third sister, your poisonous bees have bitten you, so why are you blaming me? Big sister. The Hellion Jiao saw the blood jade and knew that the situation was not good. She hurriedly tried to explain. Hellion Vivian interrupted her with a sneer, you too. Your relationship with third sister is so good that there is no distinction between you and me. You already knew that this poisonous wasp was raised by her, yet you still forced me to do so, wanting the dean to kick me out. I'd like to ask the two of you. You keep saying that I'm bullying you, but why are you working together to kill me? As soon as she finished speaking, the truth was revealed. Immediately, there was some commotion in the courtyard. Everyone's eyes all looked towards Hellion May and Hellion Jiao. No, I didn't raise it. Second sister, Quickly tell them that I didn't raise that poisonous wasp, quickly say it. Hellion May's stiff body trembled uncontrollably again. She grabbed Hellion Jower's hand and shook it, wanting her to speak. However, Hellion Jower was unable to protect herself now, so how could she defend Hellion May? Hellion Vivian's move made her become a poisonous woman in front of everyone. It shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this. No, Hellion Jower was just about to open her mouth when Tu Su Feng's cold eyes looked over. She still dared to quibble at this time. White Academy has never accepted students with low moral character. Hellion May and Hellion Jower will be kicked off the mountain and will never be allowed to enter the academy. Such a cold voice caused everyone to be shocked. The usually gentle dean was obviously angry. This was White Academy's principal. No matter how illustrious the other's background was, he had the right to make them completely disappear from White Academy without informing those ministers. After hearing this, Hellion Jower's entire body went limp. Her pair of eyes were filled with heart-wrenching tears. Never being allowed to enter the academy, it was better to just kill her directly. She raised her head and looked at Murong Changfeng, using her eyes to implore him to save her. After all, only Murong Changfeng could make Hellion Vivian, that slut, change her mind. As long as he gave that slut a little benefit, this matter might still be turned around. Murong Changfeng also didn't want to let Hellion Jower leave. After all, he had just introduced her to his master. In addition to her innate talent, her future was limitless. He couldn't just stand by and watch Hellion Jower suffer like this. Changfeng earnestly requests the principal to give the Hellion sisters a chance and let them stay. His Murong prince manner was different from other families. Even if they didn't carry the imperial family name, they were still part of the imperial family. Even if the principal wasn't afraid of anything, he still had to give him face. Seeing this, the teachers also followed one after another to plead for leniency. Yes, principal. The Hellion sisters are still young, please forgive them. Tu Su Feng's brows slightly wrinkled, somewhat absent-mindedly said, the one who was framed is not this principal. Rather than pleading with me, you might as well plead with the victims. Everyone stared blankly, only then did they look at Hellion Vivian, who had been cold and indifferent from beginning to end. Murong Changfeng thought for a moment before saying, this time, everyone misunderstood you. As for that letter of annulment, it was only a moment of impulse on my part. Your marriage with me was permitted by retired emperor, it wouldn't be so simple to not count. This time, if you can forgive them, I could treat the previous matter as if it never happened. 1 month later, I will marry you. His voice was very pleasant to hear, clear and cold with a hint of gloominess. Coupled with that luxurious appearance and deep eyes, it could almost make any young girl's heart beat. After all, these words were almost equivalent to admitting that Hellion Vivian was his future wife. The people standing here all knew that everything that Hellion Vivian did today was only to be able to obtain Murong Changfeng's attention. She liked him for 10 years. In these 10 years, time and time again, she racked her brains to think of ways to make him like her. Because of this, she suffered a lot and made a fool of herself. They all saw it. Only, Murong Changfeng didn't even want to see her once, let alone marry her. He stubbornly delayed the marriage contract again and again. This was great, Lord Murong finally promised to marry her in a month's time. How could she continue to pursue this matter? She would definitely be unable to close her mouth from smiling. Sure enough. Hellion Vivian softly smiled, as if she would agree to all of Murong Changfeng's requests. If you want me to forgive them, it's also possible. Suddenly, Beligaju's back that was leaning against the tree trunk slightly paused. The towering ancient tree shook and more than 10 leaves fell down. Murong Changfeng's lips curved into a smile. He just knew that she had done so much for him. Perhaps, he could try to treat her a little better in the future. After all, he also didn't want to lose the gaze that was always watching him. A few days ago, because of her change, he was still somewhat irritated. Although he didn't have any feelings for her. However, after that gaze that was filled with adoration and shyness disappeared, his whole person seemed to be somewhat wrong. Now that he thought about it, she was just forcing herself, saying that if she wanted him, he could take it away. She was simply lying to herself. This point was actually somewhat cute. Just like when they were young, that person pulled on his sleeve, aggressively practicing martial chi, white and tender little face filled with naughty cuteness. The more Murong Changfeng thought about it, the more likely it was. He couldn't help but laugh out loud, strolling towards Hellion Vivian. Beligaju's back that was leaning against the tree trunk once again tightened, the curve of his mouth slowly became cold. Under his long sleeves, his fingers slightly stiffened, as if he was silently enduring something. Chapter 41. As for Wei Wei's answer, it was actually within everyone's expectations. After all, someone like Murong Changfeng, who had a family background and an outstanding appearance, was hard to find in the entire capital. What's more, she'd always wanted to marry him. That's why people also didn't have anything to be surprised about, and wanted to reach out and pull Hellion Jiao Air up. However, at this time, Hellion Vivian opened her mouth again. She stood in the middle of the courtyard without any makeup, her clothes fluttering. Her eyes looked straight at Murong Changfeng, pausing after each word, "But, I want to break off the engagement." These few words were as light as the wind and clouds, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder that struck the crowd. Everyone was stunned and stopped their actions one after another. They looked at Hellion Vivian in disbelief, their eyes full of astonishment. Hellion Vivian still had an indifferent appearance. "Second sister has always emphasized that I resent her because of you. Since this is the case, Murong Changfeng does not need to be sneaky in the future. As long as Murong Changfeng agrees to break off the engagement, I will naturally help you." Murong Changfeng's lower jaw slightly tightened, his body also stiffened. His pair of eyes firmly stared at her, hiding the billowing waves of anger. This woman unexpectedly really wanted to. "Seeing that Murong Changfeng is not speaking, you should have agreed." Hellion Vivian met his eyes and laughed mockingly. If it was not for Murong Changfeng today, she would not have known that this engagement would be so troublesome. The engagement that retired emperor gave, without special reasons, could not be broken off. Since Murong Changfeng wanted to beg her for his little sister Jiao Air, then she must make him pay a price. A word of forgiveness in exchange for her freedom in the future, it was worth it. "You, good, very good. Hellion Vivian, you are really good." Murong Changfeng waved his long sleeves, the side of his face was as cold as a sculpture that had just walked out of the cold. Murong Changfeng, when did he become the person who sent himself to the door but was rejected? Moreover, she actually wanted to push him to another woman. Anger was his first reaction. If it was not for so many people watching, he would really strangle her to death with his own hands. The person who liked him was obviously she not. Now she pushed him away. Did this woman really think that he wouldn't do anything to her? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't think that Murong Changfeng would have this kind of attitude. The one who didn't want to get married was obviously him. She didn't forget that if it weren't for his divorce letter, Hellion Jiao and Hellion Mei wouldn't have dared to beat her to death and throw her into the river. Although he was not the main culprit, he had never helped her even once. From the beginning to the end, he looked on coldly as a bystander and was extremely disgusted with her. Even if such a man was rare in this world, she would not want him. Nangong Lai, who had just finished the divination test, reached out and touched his chin. The corner of his mouth slightly curled up. The matter of breaking off the engagement was actually brought up by Hellion Vivian. There's a problem, there's definitely a problem. Beligaju was still leaning against the flowering tree. He brought the teacup to his lips and slowly tasted it. The swaying branches seemed to have quietened down a lot. Ah, Ju, don't tell me you're not the least bit curious as to why Hellion Vivian would do this? Nangong Lai thoughtfully tilted his head. According to my many years of experience, she must be playing hard to get. That's right, she's playing hard to get. I really couldn't tell that this little kitten liked Murong Chong Fong that much. For him, she didn't even care about her reputation. Nangong Lai immediately stopped speaking. It wasn't because of anything else, but because of the man's pair of eyes, floating and sinking, as if brewing ice. He slightly leaned to the side, as if he was listening to him speak. One hand was casually stuck in his pocket, the other hand was lightly pinching the white porcelain teacup. It was obviously a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. Nangong Lai lowered his head and lightly coughed. Beligaju glanced at him, his eyes fogged up. His fingers clasped the teacup, unable to see whether he was happy or angry. Noisy. Just these two words made Nangong Lai's face stiffen. Hey, come back here and tell me clearly, who's noisy? This brother sees that you don't have any experience in relationships, so I'll analyze it for you. Let me say this first, you can't fight. I can fight with you using words. Beligaju didn't even pay attention to him anymore. Holding the teacup, he slightly used his strength. Nangong Lai touched the bridge of his nose. He wanted to follow, but he heard a bang. The big tree behind him seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. With a loud crash, it fell down, shaking up a thin layer of dust. When Nangong Lai saw this, he didn't dare to follow. With his back turned, he began to feel conflicted. In the end, who provoked a certain highness, and the people standing in the middle of the courtyard had already been shocked silly by Hellion Vivian's unexpected performance time and time again. Only Hellion Jiaoer, with a pair of watery eyes, fiercely glared at Hellion Vivian. Just as she was about to walk down with Hellion May's support, she heard Hellion Vivian gently smile and open her mouth. Little sisters, it seems that you've forgotten something. Hellion Vivian, I'm warning you. Don't go too far. Hellion May's usual temper had always been fiery. It was already not easy for her to endure until now. Now, any word from Hellion Vivian could light up her fire. Hellion Vivian looked at her and evilly pulled down her thin lips. Do you know why I only picked out your blood jade at the very end? I wanted to know to what extent you would frame me. I really didn't expect that little sister could still be so self-righteous after the matter has been investigated clearly. Who gave you this kind of capital? Was it father, or these teachers who spoke up for you? Then I, Hellion Wei, will also say these words today. Although grandfather has passed away, the Hellion family has also changed hands, and I'm all alone. Don't think that after framing me, you can leave without saying sorry. Even if that person has the support of countless teachers behind them, and countless powers to shield them, I will still get the justice that I deserve. Her clear voice resounded throughout the Nine Turns Academy, and didn't fade for a long time. Paw. It was like slapping everyone's face. Not only Hellion May and Hellion Jiaoer, but also those teachers who slandered her. As the cold wind blew, Hellion Wei raised her head, her ink-black hair wantonly. Her long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Seeing this scene, Grandmaster Zizun's eyes were slightly red, but he was smiling leisurely. This child was truly extremely clever. What a good retreat in order to advance. What a good get the justice that I deserve. After all these years, how many grievances had his dear disciple suffered? Tu Sufeng looked at Hellion Vivian standing in front of him. Even in the imperial palace, he had never seen a girl like Hellion Vivian. She was as tough as her mother. But she had more tenacity and clarity than that person. Originally, he still felt pity for the Hellion family. He thought that the things that the old man had won were going to be handed over to someone else. Now, Tusufong gently curved his thin lips. Perhaps this little girl would be the only variable in this. Chapter 42. What are you talking about? Wei Wei, you're even scolding us old people with your words. A white figure walked over from afar. Hellion Vivian followed the sound and looked over. Her pupils abruptly shrunk, and the chilliness emitted from her body made Yuan Ming, who was hidden in the ancient book, shiver heavily. Who exactly was the person that came, to be able to make this woman's mood fluctuate so much? Prime Minister Su. All the teachers walked over to him one after another. Grandfather. Hellion Jiao also called out, feeling wronged. She then turned her back and cried until she was covered in tears. Su Jiacheng looked at his normally most filial granddaughter being bullied to this extent, and a malicious intent immediately flashed through his eyes. Turning his head, he beamed at Hellion Vivian and said, "Your two younger sisters are still young, and are at the age to play around. They don't know the severity of the matter, so it's hard to avoid making mistakes. You're older than them. If you had said earlier that poison bee wasn't yours, how could us old people have misunderstood you? Principal, what do you say?" Tusu Feng didn't say anything. On the contrary, Grandmaster Zi Zun's eyes widened, clearly somewhat angered. Hellion Vivian tightly clenched her trembling hands. He deserved to be called the current Prime Minister. What a powerful mouth. That year, if it wasn't for this mouth, her mother might have been able to endure it. In order to support his own daughter, this Su Jiaqing, who had a human face but a beast's heart, actually bribed the Zhang and Li families, making them insist in the main hall that her mother was vicious and jealous, and couldn't tolerate anyone. Ever since that day, the entire capital treated her mother as the laughingstock after a meal. She still remembered that at that time, her mother didn't even want to take a step out of the door. It wasn't easy for her spirit to get better, but this Su Jiaqing came over to make things difficult for them. Hellion Vivian's hands that were hidden under her long sleeves slowly loosened. She didn't know if it was because she was using the same body, but that grief and anger actually made her feel as if she had experienced it herself. However, no matter how deep her anger was, she had to endure it. This old fox in front of her wasn't easy to deal with. In the past, because she was angered like this, she couldn't control herself and did many foolish things. However, the current her was already different. How could she follow his script? Misunderstanding. Hellion Vivian said calmly, "Prime Minister Su, you've used the wrong words. It's not a misunderstanding. You've wronged me." Su Jiacheng's hand paused. This Hellion family's little vile spawn didn't know how to appreciate favors. He already gave her a way out, yet she was still so serious. She was simply asking for trouble. "Grandmaster, look at this girl's stubbornness. She's as stubborn as her mother. I've already admitted my mistake, but she still won't let it go. I don't know what to do. Grandmaster, you're the state preceptor of a country. Do you have a solution?" There were so many people, yet Su Jiaqing didn't ask and only asked Grandmaster Jizun. This was because he had already heard before he came here that that little vile spawn actually dared to curry favor with the Grandmaster during the examination. He was also an important official who assisted in the imperial court, so of course he knew the Grandmaster's temperament. Presumably, the Grandmaster already loathed her to the extreme, and would definitely speak to this side. Moreover, even though Grandmaster Jizun never cared about the affairs of the country, he still had a pivotal position in the imperial court. If he could speak, then no matter how clever and eloquent that little vile spawn was, she could only shut her mouth and suffer a loss. A good-for-nothing young lady who had lost her power should know her place and stay put. If she rushed to find trouble like this, then don't blame him for being ruthless. Hearing what was said, Tu Su Feng's always gentle thick eyebrows creased tighter and tighter. Grandmaster had always been unrestrained, and did things according to his own preferences. Yet he didn't know that his next words could very possibly cause that little girl from the Hellion family to bear an injustice. In addition to his influence in the academy, if even he denied Hellion Vivian, then in the future, Hellion Vivian would have to face the entire academy's ostracism. Thinking up to here, Tu Su Feng was just about to open his mouth. An aged voice rang out. Within the gloomy voice was an unprecedented anger. It's fine if you don't admit it, but you're still insulting this old man's disciple. Not forgiving when you're in the right. Today we're not forgiving when we're in the right. Whoever doesn't accept this, you can come find this old man to ask for advice. Who was it? Who was speaking? The tone was very insolent. For a moment, everyone was somewhat unable to react. When they saw Grandmaster, who should have been sitting in the seat of honor, shake off his footsteps and walk in front of Hellion Vivian, his intention of protecting her was very obvious. Everyone was shocked. Looking at Hellion Vivian, their eyes were filled with disbelief and astonishment. Originally, this old man didn't want to open his mouth. Grandmaster's face carried a deep displeasure. He really wanted to do as his disciple said, and help her keep this secret. Only, what he didn't expect was that even though the evidence was already so obvious, these people could still be so thick-skinned and say that she's not forgiving when she's in the right. This made Grandmaster extremely displeased. Su Jiaqing, your Su family is simply going too far. Grandmaster's cold eyes swept around in a circle. No matter who it is, if they've done something wrong, then they must apologize. Not only do you not apologize, but you're also pressuring my disciple like this. I'd like to see, with this old man here, who dares to slander my disciple. After hearing these words, the teachers all heavily sucked in a breath of air. Even Su Jia Cheng's legs were somewhat soft. How could it be like this? No matter who it was, they didn't expect Grandmaster to actually accept a disciple, and the one he accepted was even a trash from the Hellion family. It's over this time. Recalling the words they'd said before, every teacher's back was covered with a layer of cold sweat. They'd still naively thought that Grandmaster didn't find Hellion Vivian pleasing to the eye, and simply didn't think deeper. Looking at it again now, all of them had misunderstood, and even in front of Grandmaster, they'd said that his disciple wasn't anything. Hellion Jiao and Hellion Mei's complexions were the most unsightly. Hellion Mei's hands even started to tremble. Before, she'd still ridiculed her in front of that trash, saying that she definitely didn't know that Grandmaster, but now... No, this was absolutely not true. Not to mention these outsiders who didn't dare to believe it, even Grandmaster Zizun, who was rather familiar with Grandmaster Tu Su Feng, also didn't expect this development. His eyebrows slightly raised. She's really your disciple? When did you accept her? Grandmaster originally wanted to properly talk about the matter of being stunned by his own disciple a few days ago, but once he saw Hellion Vivian's cold gaze turn towards him, the old man instantly changed his words. I just accepted her. Just accepted her. Tu Su Feng clearly didn't believe it, and his eyebrows raised. Grandmaster straightened his chest. What? This old man just finds this little girl pleasing to the eye, so I want to accept her as my disciple? Is that not possible? Of course it's possible. Tu Su Feng's gentle and refined eyes seemed to be able to see through everything, yet he didn't expose it. That Hellion family's girl was actually able to suppress this old stubborn man. It was indeed interesting. Chapter 43. As for Su Jia-ching, he couldn't wait to find a hole in the ground and crawl into it. He had lived for such a long time, and had always held a pivotal position in the Dragon War Empire. This was the first time he was blushing from someone's words. Although he didn't know what kind of luck that little vile spawn had to make Grandmaster Zi Zun fancy her. But right now, he only hoped that everyone's attention would be focused on that little vile spawn, and not mention the matter just now. As it happened, Hellion May had long been spoiled. She rushed in front of Hellion Vivian and shouted herself hoarse, "You did it on purpose. You deliberately made me and second sister look bad." Oh. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. From the beginning to the end, it was third sister and second sister who framed me. How did I deliberately make you look bad? Hellion May completely lost her reason from her smile. From the beginning to the end, you were just pretending. Shut up. Su Jia-ching pulled Hellion May back with great strength, and directly pushed away the imperial bodyguards behind them. He fiercely glared at her and secretly cursed. When this girl gets angry, she doesn't care about the situation. She didn't even learn the slightest bit of Jiao Er's temperament and scheming. This time, it would be difficult to deceive them. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know what he was planning. Did he want to leave things unsettled? How could there be such an easy thing in this world? It's said that Prime Minister Su has always been impartial. Now that your two granddaughters have framed and insulted me, I don't know how Prime Minister Su wants to deal with this. Hellion Wei calmly and unhurriedly blocked the guards who wanted to take Hellion May away. Just like that, she lazily stood on the main road, allowing no one to leave. The masters didn't say anything. Even Tu Su Feng and Grandmaster Zi Zun had a quiet appearance. However, their gazes were all cast on Su Jia-cheng's body, bringing along an indescribable sense of oppression. Su Jia-cheng knew that he couldn't continue to act like a fool. In his heart, he couldn't wait to skin this little vile spawn. This little vile spawn's one sentence pushed him to the heart of the struggle. If he didn't take out something, he was afraid that even his reputation would be damaged. He was a high-ranking official in the imperial court, and the biggest taboo was to lose his prestige. He didn't know why the other party had latched onto this point of his, but Su Jia-cheng understood that this time, even if he couldn't bear to, he still had to put on an act in front of everyone. To think that he had been in the court for so many years, yet he was forced to such a state by a little bastard. Su Jia-cheng bit down on the thin meat in his mouth, but his expression didn't change. Weighing the situation left and right, he calmly opened his mouth. "Jiao Er, Xiao Mei, grandfather knows that you two didn't sincerely plan to frame your eldest sister. However, your natural natures are mischievous and mischievous. You simply didn't care about the seriousness of the matter and spoke without thinking, causing your eldest sister to be wronged. If grandfather doesn't give Wei an explanation today, it will be against public opinion and etiquette. Since it was your mouth that made the mistake, you should give yourself 20 slaps and admit your mistake. Grandfather." At this moment, even Hellion Jiao was stupefied. Her entire body trembled as she looked at Su Jia-cheng. She didn't dare to believe that her grandfather would actually make such a decision. How could she continue to stay in White Academy after this? How could Su Jia-cheng not know the consequences of this? In the end, he deeply shouted, still not making a move. Hellion Jiao stared blankly for a moment. Her eyelashes were tender and beautiful like a half-opened rose with moisture. The Empress had always doted on her. When had she ever treated her like this? Hellion May's complexion greatly changed. She didn't dare to believe it as she turned her head, but what she received was her grandfather's cold and indifferent gaze. Helplessly, the person she was most afraid of was her grandfather. She didn't dare to not do what her grandfather wanted her to do, so she could only shrink her neck. Hellion Jiao bit her lips until they were bright red. Tears welled up in her eyes. Ever since she was born, she had never suffered this kind of humiliation. She entered White Academy with first-place results and was sought after everywhere. Yet today, she had to slap her own mouth in front of everyone. This was all because of that little slut. If it wasn't for her, how could she have fallen to this point? Make your move. Su Jia Cheng's voice weakened. In the end, he couldn't bear it and turned his back, not wanting to watch. Helian Zhao and Helian Mei had no other choice. They could only clench their teeth and slowly raise their hands under everyone's gaze. Once again, they slapped their own faces. Their eyes looked at Helian Vivian, overflowing with poisonous intent. Slap. Once. Slap. Twice. Hearing the sound of the slaps beside her ears, Helian Vivian only stood there calmly. From beginning to end, she didn't change her posture. Until 20 seconds later, Helian Zhao stopped her hand. She felt a burning pain on her face, as if everyone was looking at her. The thick sense of humiliation almost made her face change color. Right now, she only wanted to personally tear Helian Vivian apart. Su Jia Qing pressed down on her hand and secretly used force. Jiao Er, you and Wei Wei are sisters. How can sisters have overnight hatred? You've always had a kind personality. Grandfather has always known this. Quickly go and apologize to your elder sister. This matter will be considered over. Grandfather. Helian Zhao's eyes were filled with tears. She knew that her grandfather wanted her to go and apologize in order to protect her reputation. However, to make her lower her head in front of that little slut, she really couldn't do it. Su Jia Qing lowered his tone. Quickly go. Yes. Helian Zhao took a deep breath. She moved like a lotus and walked in front of Helian Vivian. She wanted to maintain her delicate and pitiful image in front of others. However, she discovered that the corner of her mouth was extremely painful. She couldn't help but hate a little more. It was us who misunderstood elder sister. Helian Vivian looked at her and slowly smiled. Just like what I said to Prime Minister Su before, little sister, allow me to remind you again. It's not a misunderstanding, it's an injustice. You. Helian Zhao was so angry that her small face was distorted. She took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the viciousness in her throat. Elder sister is right. This little vile spawn. Su Jia Qing clenched his hand and amiably smiled in front of others. Seeing you sisters reconcile as before, this official is also happy. Helian Vivian looked at him with a smile. Prime Minister Su is right. This indeed makes one happy. Don't worry, everything is just the beginning. In the future, there will be more and more things that will make you guys happy. Everything that you guys stole from me and from my mother, I will personally take it back, little by little. Su Jia Qing also didn't know why, but when he faced that pair of eyes, he unexpectedly felt a trace of black energy overflowing from them. However, he didn't forget his own identity and stiffly smiled. Grandmaster Zizun, you're blessed. You've really accepted a good disciple. Zizun didn't give him the slightest bit of face and coldly said, next, there's still the academy exam. Miscellaneous people can leave now. The smile of Su Jia Qing, who was called miscellaneous people, stiffened. His expression was as unsightly as it could be. Zizun didn't care about this and brought his own disciple to another courtyard. He wanted to see what kind of results the superior courtyard's exam would have. According to his conjecture, that stinky brat who lived in Ghost Palace should have appeared long ago. At this time, he should have displayed his skills at the superior courtyard. He must show him to his own disciple so that after she knew him, she could hide a little further away from that stinky brat. Chapter 44. However, Ji Zun miscalculated one thing. That is, the elusive His Highness simply didn't take the test at the superior compound. Instead, he took the test at the inferior compound and fine compound's martial test arena where no one went to watch. The Academy decided to separate the male and female tests for the sake of ensuring the fairness of the competition. But it also imperceptibly gave His Highness a convenient condition to conceal his identity. Because everyone's attention was only on Helene Vivian, they wanted to see how she would make a fool of herself. Therefore, very few people would know that there was another test in the other compound. How could it be you? Zhang Shijia, who originally wanted to show off his skills in the martial chi competition, looked at the man standing in front of him and couldn't help but take a step back. Beligaju coldly looked down at him and didn't say anything. He slowly moved his wrist, handsome as a god, revealing an unconcealable murderous aura. Wait a minute. Zhang Shijia couldn't control himself and screamed out. He wouldn't forget how terrifying the other person was. This man was just like a venomous snake. It seemed that if he moved, he would immediately be swallowed into the other's stomach. The injury on his leg hadn't healed yet. The severe fracture was all bestowed by the man in front of him. But he didn't dare to say anything. Because the other person's thick oppressive feeling actually made him unable to breathe. Not only that. Until now, he still hadn't investigated the identity of the man in front of him. He originally thought that he would be an expert hidden in the superior compound. But he didn't expect that he would actually appear here. Could it be that this person was also someone from the 4 great clans who infiltrated? No. It can't be. He'd seen all the people from the 4 great clans, but he'd never even seen this person in front of him. Zhang Shijia stared blankly at the increasingly approaching handsome man. The contempt in his eyes had long been replaced by shock. Who the hell are you? As if he wanted to spit out the shock in his heart, he madly roared. The end of his voice had some unconcealable trembling. On the other hand, Beligaju's thin lips curled into a cold arc. That ascetic and arrogant attitude seemed to be saying that he was not worthy of knowing his identity. Zhang Shijia could feel the murderous aura surging around him like waves. His legs couldn't help but tremble. He immediately threw away the sword in his hand and rolled off the stage, scared witless. He yelled, "I don't want to compete anymore. I want to forfeit." Did you hear that? This young master wants to forfeit. Bailey Jiaju also didn't give chase. He only stood in the same place, raised his hand and flicked his lapel that originally didn't have a trace of dust. His expression was languid, as if the one that escaped was merely a little white mouse. The 2 teachers looked at each other and were somewhat dissatisfied. Ever since they became teachers of the White Academy, they had never encountered such a situation. A student from the good compound who was about to break through to the fire class actually fled in panic in front of a poor student who hadn't done any martial chi testing up until now. If this matter were to spread out, it would be a disgrace to them as teachers. Because it was unprecedented, if other people found out, they would also lose face. They simply announced that Beligaju had won and didn't even let him do a martial chi testing. In any case, after a month, there would naturally be people who would give him a good look. As a result, when this matter spread to other people's ears, it became that the new poor student had good luck and met an opponent who forfeited. As for the truth, only Tusu Feng, who received the news, knew. After hearing the report, the corners of his mouth curled up. His tone was indifferent, subduing the enemy's army without fighting. He is considered a talented general. Who is the principal talking about? Su Jiaqing still hadn't left. He stood beside Tu Su Feng and tried his best to warm up the atmosphere. With such a talented general, this old man can introduce him to Lord Murong and let him take care of him a bit more. Tu Su Feng glanced at him. That glance made Su Jiaqing somewhat baffled. He didn't know if he was thinking too much. Why did he unexpectedly see a hint of ridicule in Tu Su Feng's eyes? That shouldn't be possible. Tu Su Feng had always been gentle. Thank you for your concern, Prime Minister Su. He's only a junior, and his conduct is a bit arrogant. He probably doesn't want to be taken care of by anyone. After Tu Su Feng finished speaking, he wanted to laugh. If he didn't remember incorrectly, that stinking brat didn't even reach the age of 10 and had already oppressed all the aristocratic young masters in the capital. Now, Su Jiaqing actually said in front of him that he wanted someone to take care of him. If Su Jiaqing knew that the person he wanted to take care of was that highness, who knew what kind of expression he would have? Su Jiaqing couldn't see through what the other was thinking. Seeing that he spoke politely, he didn't think much of it. Since it's like this, Principal, you can go ahead and do your work. This old man will stroll around a bit more. Prime Minister Su. Tu Su Feng opened his mouth to stop Su Jiaqing's footsteps. He said in a refined manner, what Grand Master said is correct. This is White Academy. Retired Emperor has also made a rule that any minister is prohibited from wandering around here. This will affect the mood of the students. If Prime Minister Su doesn't have any important matters, then please return. I still have matters to attend to, so I won't be able to properly entertain Prime Minister Su. Su Jiaqing, who had been rebuffed twice in a row, ground his teeth until they made a sound. He stood under the tree with a dark old face. Looking at Tu Su Feng's departing figure, his eyes were filled with unconcealable anger. Each and every one of you, who do you think you are? Now that there were only his own people left here, Su Jiaqing didn't have anything to hide. The teachers tried their best to curry favor with him. Senior Su, please calm down. The principal is still young, we can't do anything about it. Retired Emperor, that old man's thoughts can't be seen through. Letting such a young person become the principal, and for so many years at that, sigh. That's right, that's right. Some of the older great masters also chimed in from the side, their expressions rather helpless. Su Jiaqing put on a generous appearance, forget it, they're all juniors. This old man also won't bicker with them. Actually, the information that I asked you to investigate, have you made any progress? Rest assured, Senior, this old man is at the superior compound. One of the great masters replied rather complacently, as long as the third prince enters the superior compound, the first person to get the news will be this old man. Su Jiaqing nodded his head in satisfaction, good, very good. In addition, I'll have to trouble Great Master to take care of this granddaughter of mine. As he spoke, he extended his hand and patted Helian Zhao's shoulder. His heart was filled with hatred and heartache. That great master immediately continued, Miss Helian Vivian's innate talent is exceptionally good. Even in the superior compound, she's also a well-known figure. Senior Su doesn't need to care about what happened just now. This is only a small test. That trash is good at currying favor, so it's inevitable that Great Master will be momentarily muddle-headed and be unable to see through people. By the time Great Master understands, it'll be too late for him to hate her. After all, that Helian Vivian doesn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. She definitely won't be able to learn martial cultivation. Even this test was merely a fluke. Chapter 45. Although Su Jiaqing's mouth didn't say anything, his expression explained everything. What the teacher said was what he was thinking. However, this was White Academy after all. He wouldn't be stupid enough to admit his own thoughts in front of so many people. He only smiled and changed the topic. It's getting late, this old man should also leave. Leave the matter of sending this old man to this old man's two granddaughters. Everyone naturally didn't dare to have any objections. They only urged Helian Zhao and Helian Mei to definitely send Lord Su down the mountain. Clang! Once Helian Jiaoer left the academy, she couldn't suppress her anger anymore. She kicked away the bodyguard in front of her. The bodyguards knew that their master's mood wasn't good, so they didn't dare to say anything. "Grandfather!" Helian Jiaoer cried uncomfortably. Her flower-like face was beaten until it was unbearably red and swollen. Her eyes were brimming with venom. "You always told us to endure a bit more. If we continue to endure, that little slut will climb all over my head. It's nothing for your granddaughter to suffer a little, but grandfather, look at her attitude today. She clearly wants to embarrass you." When Su Jiaqing heard this, his face changed. He first threw a tantrum at the bodyguards, then extended his hand and stroked Helian Jiaoer's back. "Grandfather knows that you've been wrong this time. But Jiaoer, you must remember, your future riches and honor are indescribable. It's not worth dirtying your hands for such a little vile spawn. Grandfather's meaning is that I should continue to be on good terms with Lord Murong." Helian Jiaoer was always smarter than Helian Mei. Helian Mei was still in a daze when Helian Jiaoer more or less figured out the other layer of meaning in Su Jiaqing's words. Su Jiaqing smiled and nodded. "It's good to continue to be on good terms with the Lord. However, grandfather didn't come this time because of the Lord, but because of another person. There's news from the palace that in this year's martial qi competition, the retired emperor will secretly visit the Phoenix Pavilion to watch. Although it's called a test, it's actually a consort selection for the third prince. At that time, there will be many experts entering the capital. Not only will there be students from the White Academy, there will also be many experts from the people participating in the competition. You must win. The third prince is choosing a consort." Helian Jiao exclaimed. Su Jiaqing saw his granddaughter's joy in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curved into an arc. "Grandfather knows that you have feelings for His Highness. The retired emperor's eunuch has already spread the word that the third prince will also leave Ghost Palace and enter the academy to resume his studies. You're also in the superior compound, so you must think of a way to seize this opportunity and interact with the third prince more often." "Grandfather." Helian Jiao blushed and pinched the handkerchief in her hand. She was bashful as if she was experiencing her first awakening of love. Su Jiaqing laughed heartily. "You're still shy. Grandfather only knows how to make fun of Jiaoer." Helian Jiaoer acted like a spoiled child as she stamped her feet. Then she laughed, and her eyes carried a trace of pride. "Daughter will definitely amaze everyone in the competition." Su Jiaqing looked at her appearance and seemed to have thought of something. His mouth slightly opened, and his pleasantly surprised expression couldn't be concealed. "Jiaoer, could it be that you've advanced?" Helian Jiaoer nodded her head, and her thin lips carried a smiling expression. "Grandfather wanted me to drink that year, and it helped me. When I advanced, I always felt a warm current in my body. The people of the Helian family only have this little benefit." Su Jiaqing stroked his own white beard. "Originally, I wanted to take advantage of this visit to the academy to have Grandmaster Zizun accept you as a disciple. However, looking at it now, that old man is also a muddle-headed worm. He didn't accept a genius like you, but instead accepted a piece of trash." Now, as long as Helian Jiaoer heard Helian Vivian's name, her heart would feel stifled. "When I was at the Defense Department, I tested her quite a bit. She was indeed a hedonist, but she was an idiot who didn't know anything. However, today..." Speaking to this point, Helian Jiaoer paused for a moment before asking in a deep voice, "Grandfather, do you think that the poison we put in her body before didn't have any effect? Could it be that she recovered her martial qi? Otherwise, with her ability, she definitely wouldn't be younger sister's opponent." Su Jiaqing was also thinking about this problem. However, very quickly, he shook his head. "That's impossible. As long as someone is poisoned by the devouring heaven poison, they will completely lose their martial qi and their meridians will be damaged. Even with the help of an expert like Grandmaster Zizun, it would still be impossible for the originally damaged meridians to be healed. What's more, so many years have passed. That little vile spawn's body has already been emptied of all of her vitality by the devouring heaven poison. Ordinary fighting and killing is still possible, but it's simply impossible for her to cultivate again. This is because her meridians are already dead. In this lifetime, she will never have martial chi again. But Hellion Jiaoer still wanted to say something. Hellion Mei clenched her teeth and interrupted her. Second sister, that little slut was only lucky for a moment. I still have injuries on my body, so I haven't used all of my martial chi. She is also a little clever. I don't know what she did, but she made me stay there and couldn't even move. Otherwise, I would have already treated her as a cripple. How could I still let her be so arrogant? Hellion Jiaoer also remembered that at that time, Hellion Mei really didn't move at all. Second sister, she couldn't even light up the crystal ball. What martial chi could she have? She simply took advantage of the time when we weren't paying attention and used some underhanded method. Hellion Mei was so angry that both of her hands were clenched. She wholeheartedly believed that Hellion Vivian played a trick. Su Jiaqing wrinkled his white eyebrows. This little vile spawn is indeed a little strange. However, you also heard what the teachers said just now. Her path won't be long. Without martial chi, no matter how smart she is, she won't be able to learn martial arts. Grandmaster Zizun will expel her sooner or later. Jiaoer, as a woman, you must remember to understand that your hands must be as clean as possible. Only by being a little softer will you be able to gain the favor of men. In the future, you will definitely be indescribably noble. Restrain your thoughts on His Highness and the air, understand? Hellion Jiaoer's eyes turned, overflowing with light. Jiaoer understands grandfather's words. It's just that Jiaoer is afraid that little slut will play some tricks on the martial chi testing platform. After hearing this, Su Jiacheng's eyes also flashed. Don't worry, there will naturally be people who will deal with her. Grandfather will make her regret participating in the martial chi competition. Really? Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. Grandfather, what do you plan to do? Su Jiaqing patted her hand, his thin lips raised into a smile. Since ancient times, money can make even ghosts turn millstones. As long as we can bribe those teachers, you don't have to worry about this matter. You only have to take care of yourself. Even if you want to do something like dealing with Hellion Vivian, you have to use other people. Don't dirty your own hands. Grandfather's teachings are right. Hellion Jiaoer smiled and leaned over. Grandfather's idea is still the best. Once we bribe the teachers, whether we win or lose, it will be up to us. No matter how powerful that little slut's methods are, she can only kneel and beg for mercy. Su Jiaqing thought of that scene and also laughed. Alright, although the martial chi competition is important, if we can't find the third prince, everything will be in vain. You must pay attention to the superior compound. I keep feeling that His Highness has already arrived. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.